A month had passed, and duels were taking place within the training ground inside the Lord's palace. 4 people were fighting against a single man. Ko Wang-hul unleashed his fist formation, while Sama-chuk, Mungku, and Chae-takim fought alongside him, each using their best skills as they faced Yo-won. They struggled to keep track of Yo-won's movements, unable to even follow his trace. Only by standing back to back were they able to prevent him from breaking through their formation and attacking relentlessly. Mungku felt growing frustration as she realized that Yo-won was not even using half of his internal energy. The pressure intensified as Yo-won's speed continued to increase. Great Guardian Markham gasped in astonishment as he was the only warrior present who could barely follow the movements left within Yo-won's trace. He observed Yo-won's footwork closely, noting the strange steps as Yo-won lightly jumped across the ground. The movements had appeared simple during practice, but when combined with internal energy and the step of the wind god, they became extremely difficult to predict. Unable to follow Yo-won's movements, Wang-hul chose to wait for an opening. That moment arrived when Yo-won charged straight toward his chest. Seizing the opportunity, Wang-hul thrust his fist forward, pouring all of his energy into the attack. At the last moment, Yo-won twisted his waist in an unnatural motion, slipping past the attack and driving his fist into Wang-hul's ribs. Yo-won immediately spun and delivered a kick while Wang-hul was airborne, sending him crashing backward. Sama-chuk, who had been moving in to attack, was struck by Wang-hul's flying body and was thrown away as well. Mungku and Chae-takim could only stare in shock as the 2 men were sent flying together. Chae-takim was shaken as disbelief filled his mind. He could not understand how Yo-won had become so frighteningly powerful as time passed, despite not using his abilities every day. What troubled him even more was the martial art Yo-won was using, which felt completely different from existing styles and resembled refined physical techniques rather than conventional martial arts. At the same time, Yo-won calmly assessed himself, realizing that he was beginning to control his strength properly. NANO reported that the mixed martial art, combining boxing, the wind god stride, and taekwondo, had reached roughly 75% completion. Within his thoughts, Yo-won reflected that asking NANO to analyze the blood reversion divine art and apply it to his body had been the right decision. Through battles against powerful opponents, he had clearly understood how weak he still was. If he truly wished to become stronger, he needed to refine his existing abilities to their highest possible level. Wang-hul lay sprawled on top of Sama-chuk, letting out a pained groan as he checked on him. Crushed under Wang-hul's weight, Sama-chuk was unable to respond. Yo-won extended his hand toward Wang-hul and checked whether he was injured. Wang-hul grasped the hand and stood up, stating that he was fine and expressing sincere admiration. He acknowledged that the 4 of them together were not enough to defeat Yo-won. Yo-won responded with honesty, noting that he was still far from reaching the mystic realm. Wang-hul was visibly startled by the mention of that realm. Yo-won then explained that he was attempting to achieve enlightenment through nightly meditation, but had yet to gain even a faint sense of it, concluding that he should not allow himself to become impatient. At that moment, Huan Yi arrived and paid his respects to Yo-won as the cult leader. Yo-won recognized him immediately and questioned his presence. Huan Yi reported that a message had arrived from a member of the Darkness sect stationed in Hebei province. Yo-won frowned upon hearing the location and questioned whether something had gone wrong. Huan Yi revealed that the special dispatch squad sent to search for the divine physician had gone missing in the abandoned Sword Valley. 10 days earlier, the area had been enveloped in dense fog that severely limited visibility. A valley lay beyond a forest that was almost always shrouded in mist. An old man standing in front of a restaurant pointed toward the eastern forest and explained that passing through it would lead to the valley. Baekji expressed his thanks, but the old man dismissed it coldly, stating that he had merely pointed them toward death. He warned that entering the valley during heavy fog was essentially suicide, shook his head, and returned inside the restaurant. Baekji felt immediate regret for offering thanks. After some time, the group moved eastward and soon found the dense forest looming through the fog. At the forest entrance stood an old wooden sign bearing the words Abandoned Sword Valley. As they proceeded deeper, Yin Moha carefully observed her surroundings and sensed an increasing resonance that felt like the energy of swords. She questioned whether they should follow that resonance and then decided to take the lead herself. Ho Sanghwa agreed without hesitation, and the rest followed behind. Yin Moha advanced through the thick fog, continuing forward until the forest abruptly ended. What appeared before them caused her to freeze in shock. The rest of the team reacted the same way, their expressions filled with astonishment as Yin Moha frowned and drew her sword. At that moment, a shadowy figure launched an attack on them. 20 days had passed. To the north of Hebei province lay the Yellow River, a vast body of water stretching endlessly as it flowed through the land. The riders who had reached a hill overlooking the river reined in their horses and came to a halt. They stared down at the enormous river, gasping in astonishment at its sheer scale. Munku and Hobum could not hide their amazement as they took in the sight, openly reacting to how immense the Yellow River was. Nearby, the fourth elder, young Danwa, let out a long sigh as he watched their reactions. In his thoughts, he lamented that his first mission after becoming an elder was not a combat assignment, but the role of a guide through the Central Plains. Still, he accepted it, knowing that otherwise the burden would have fallen on the Great Guardian. Danwa then formally reported to Yowon that once they crossed the Yellow River, they would be entering the territory of the Orthodox faction. He cautioned that although Yowon was wearing a human face mask and would likely go unrecognized, there were still potential dangers and vigilance was necessary. He also pointed out that a ferry lay below them, a place where many people gathered, making it important for them to cross quickly. Yowon, his face concealed beneath the skin mask, silently nodded in agreement. When they boarded the boat, Hobum was unable to contain his excitement, openly expressing that it was his first time ever riding one. Munku admitted that it was also her first experience, adding that everyone in the Six Sword Troop had wanted to accompany them, but had been unable to do so. Hobum remarked that secrecy was essential for this journey, especially since someone as large as Wang Hul would inevitably draw attention. Munku agreed with that assessment. Munku then recalled that Wang Hul had appeared unusually anxious and restless, wondering if he was deeply worried about Baekji. Hobum reacted with amusement, noting that Munku was unaware of the reason and hinted that the truth would be revealed in time. Listening to their exchange, Danwa reflected inwardly that both of them were naive. He found the situation unusual, particularly that Hobum was serving as an aide to Hojin Chang, the leader of the palace guards, a position that technically placed him above the Six Sword Troop's warden. Although the ultimate peak was not a weak realm, Danwa found it difficult to believe that this was someone the cult leader would normally choose, given his tendency to select subordinates based on strength alone. Still, Hobum's loyalty was undeniable, as he had gone 10 days without rest while constantly attending to the cult leader. Danwa's thoughts then turned to Warden Mun, who was currently wearing a human face mask. Even so, he was certain she was a woman of beauty great enough to bring ruin to a nation, and her martial prowess was equally exceptional, earning her the position of second strongest within the Six Sword Troop. Yet above all of them, the most astonishing figure was still the cult leader himself. Yowon was the second heavenly demon in the history of their cult, and it was almost unbelievable that he had not even reached the age of 20. Despite that, he had already dismantled half of the six great sects and had saved the cult from crisis on 2 separate occasions. Danwa acknowledged that Yowon's martial prowess clearly surpassed his own, and he felt a deep sense of anticipation at being able to witness the cult leader's true value with his own eyes during this journey. After sailing across the river, Chun Yowon and his party arrived in Hebei province. From there, they rode on horseback for 5 consecutive days, switching horses along the way to continue without rest. Thanks to young Danwa's past experience as a branch manager in the northeastern region of Henan province, their journey proceeded smoothly without any major complications. By the end of the 5th day, they had reached an area near the abandoned Sword Valley, located in the northwestern region of Hebei province. The weather had been cloudy since the afternoon, and the sky was now darkened with heavy clouds, signaling that rain would soon fall. As they moved forward, a small inn came into view. Hobum immediately noticed it and informed Yowon. Danwa followed up by suggesting that they rest at the inn for the night and resume their journey early the next morning. Yowon acknowledged the suggestion with a nod. As Yowon observed the surroundings, his gaze settled on the mountain peaks ahead, which appeared difficult to cross. He recognized that the abandoned Sword Valley lay between those peaks. Although he believed that Elder Yin, Baekji, and Ho Sangwa possessed enough martial prowess to avoid being easily defeated, he resolved inwardly to find them soon and hoped for their safety. The group soon arrived before the small inn known as Tangyuan Inn. Munku remarked that while the inn was not large, it seemed to have everything they needed. Hobum led the horses toward the barn to tie them up, allowing the rest to enter the inn first. As they stepped into the dining area, the entire group tensed and halted instinctively. Danwa immediately realized the problem. Despite their efforts to avoid orthodox martial artists during their journey, they had encountered monks from the Wu-Tang sect of all groups in this place. Although the cult leader was currently disguised with a human face mask, the situation remained dangerous. If the Orthodox Miram Alliance discovered that Yowon was on the move, the consequences were unpredictable. Extreme caution was required. Danwa discreetly sent a telepathic message to Yowon, informing him that many Orthodox martial artists were present. Most appeared insignificant, but the monks seated there clearly belonged to the Wu-Tang sect, and Danwa asked how they should proceed. Yowon considered the situation carefully. With the worsening weather, conducting a search within the valley would be difficult, and provoking conflict within Orthodox territory would only complicate matters further. He decided that avoidance was the best course of action and instructed Danhwa to keep a low profile. Danhwa acknowledged the decision with a silent nod. Hobum arrived late, completely soaked by the rain, and instinctively reacted to the downpour before noticing the monks dressed in white inside the inn. The sight made him frown. A telepathic warning from young Danhwa immediately followed, telling him not to say anything. Hobum suppressed his reaction, pretended nothing was wrong, and took a seat. Both Hobum and Munku were experiencing the Murim world firsthand, and the presence of hostile forces made them tense. Yoan, however, remained entirely unbothered by the situation, his calm demeanor unchanged. Observing this, Danhwa reflected inwardly that although he had heard this was Yoan's first time in Murim, the cult leader was so composed that it was impossible to discern his thoughts. An old man smoking a pipe rose from his seat and approached Yoan's table, asking whether they were having dinner. Danhwa immediately inquired about available rooms. The old man apologized and implied that the inn was full, given the crowded conditions and the rain. He eventually mentioned that there was one remaining room, though it was small and cramped. Danhwa hesitated internally, unwilling to let the cult leader sleep in such poor conditions. At that moment, a monk spoke up, recognizing their predicament and expressing his willingness to give up his own room. Another person reacted with surprise, questioning whether the monk truly intended to do so. The monk calmly affirmed his decision, explaining that as someone who practiced Taoism, he could not ignore travelers in need. The innkeeper was delighted and announced that monk Jinju Mu of the Wutang sect was offering his room to them. Danhwa bowed deeply in gratitude and thanked him for his generosity. Jinju Mu dismissed the thanks, remarking that friends could be found anywhere in the world, and that it was only right to help fellow martial artists who appeared to be heroes trained in martial arts. Hearing this, Danhwa realized inwardly that Jinju Mu had mistaken them for orthodox martial artists. Jinju Mu then secretly sent a telepathic message to Danhwa, noting that it seemed Danhwa was serving his master and reassuring him to use the room without worry. He followed this by winking at Hobum. Danhwa nearly burst into laughter but restrained himself, and even Yoan allowed a faint smile to surface after overhearing the telepathic exchange. Young Danhwa quickly realized the situation. From Jinju Mu's perspective, Hobum appeared to be the weakest among them, which had led him to mistakenly assume that Hobum was their leader. Hobum, unaware of what was happening, showed visible confusion. When Jinju Mu returned to his seat with a laugh, Hobum grimaced and secretly sent a telepathic message to Yoan, expressing his discomfort and suspicion that the monk was behaving strangely, even comparing the wink to Elder Juan's mannerisms, and wondering if the man was a pervert. Yoan offered no response, and Hobum shuddered after imagining it. They ordered simple meat noodles and food, maintaining normal conversation outwardly while exchanging important matters through telepathic messages. Danhwa informed Yoan that the Scarlet Jade plaque, which was necessary to meet the divine physician, was currently with the missing special dispatch squad. He suggested that locating the squad should be their top priority while searching the abandoned Sword Valley. Yoan replied that he hoped the rain would stop by the next day. The innkeeper returned and mentioned that the rain would likely end early the following morning. Hobum wondered aloud why it had been raining so heavily. The old man explained that he had lived in the area for 30 years and that this was not the rainy season, describing the downpour as nothing more than a temporary shower. Hobum reacted with visible relief upon hearing that. The old man then cautiously asked whether they were also planning to enter the abandoned Sword Valley. The moment the question was raised, the dining hall fell into complete silence. The noise from earlier vanished, and although the other guests pretended to be uninterested, their attention was clearly focused on the old man's words. Yoan and his companions sensed the unnatural tension filling the room and quietly glanced around. The old man continued, explaining that he was speaking purely out of concern and strongly advised them not to enter the abandoned Sword Valley. Hobum reacted in surprise. The old man elaborated that people who had entered the valley recently had not returned, stating that he was simply warning them not to act recklessly. Danhwa felt uneasy, as no reports had mentioned anyone going missing in the valley, aside from the special dispatch squad. He politely asked the old man to explain further. The old man replied that not long ago, a group of martial artists similar to them had passed through the area. People had seen them enter the valley, but no one had ever seen them come out alive. The old man let out a deep sigh as thunder roared outside and lightning flashed through the rain. Yoan calmly asked whether something had happened inside the valley. The old man replied that a mere innkeeper like him could not possibly know such things, but insisted that his warning should not be ignored. He stated that thick fog would certainly follow once the rain stopped and urged them to return to where they had come from instead of entering the valley and meeting an unnatural death. Young Danwa sent a discreet telepathic message to Yowon, noting that there were too many people listening inside the hall and suggesting that he question the old man later. He advised Yowon to rest after finishing dinner. Yowon silently agreed, judging Danwa's caution to be appropriate. They returned their attention to their meal. The old man went back to smoking his pipe, and the dining hall gradually grew noisy again. However, the atmosphere had subtly changed. Countless telepathic conversations were now being exchanged throughout the hall. With NANO tapping into those transmissions, Yowon was able to hear them clearly. One group exchanged suspicions, suggesting that something might have happened to someone and that the innkeeper might know more than he was letting on, while another cautioned against jumping to conclusions and urged restraint. Another group was also discussing the abandoned Sword Valley. They believed something must have occurred there, but expressed confidence that the Vice Sect leader could not have been defeated so easily. Despite lingering doubts, they decided to continue their search as planned. A different group appeared to be concerned about something else entirely. They questioned whether a certain item had truly been there, dismissed the possibility that it had not been brought before, and briefly wondered if something had happened to the divine physician. That idea was quickly rejected as they acknowledged the formidable protection surrounding him. They concluded that there were too many people gathered and decided to depart as soon as the rain stopped. As Yowon listened to all of this, his thoughts sank deeper. He realized that the item being discussed could only be the Scarlet Jade plaque that granted an audience with the divine physician. The divine physician was certainly within the abandoned Sword Valley, yet Elder Yin and the Special Dispatch Squad had gone missing without a trace. Yowon questioned what could have possibly happened inside the abandoned Sword Valley to cause such an outcome. Young Danwa expressed concern for the missing group, but stated that it would be best for everyone to recover from their fatigue for the night, so they could move out the next day. He explained that the room provided by the Wutong sect would be used by their liege, while the rest would make other arrangements. Hobum immediately interrupted, pointing out that the innkeeper had said the room was cramped and insisting that it would not be appropriate for 3 people to share it. Danwa frowned in confusion and replied that the room was obviously meant for their liege alone. Hobum hesitated before arguing that it would be improper for the 2 of them to share such a small room with a woman. He then awkwardly suggested, with a forced cough and laugh, that it might be better for Munku to stay in the same room as their liege and act as his bodyguard. Munku's face turned red as her jaw dropped in shock. Danwa considered the suggestion seriously, wondering whether it might be safer for someone to remain with their liege rather than leaving him alone to rest. After a brief pause, he agreed and decided that Warden Munku would stay with Yowon. Munku immediately tried to object, but before she could finish, Hobum cheerfully declared the matter settled and pushed Danwa toward their own room. As he did so, Hobum glanced back at Yowon, winked exaggeratedly, and smugly congratulated himself for creating an opportunity for the 2 of them, hoping they would have a pleasant night. Yowon frowned with a flushed face, inwardly cursing Hobum for his behavior, while cold sweat formed on his skin. Yowon and Munku entered the room in awkward silence. Munku's heart raced uncontrollably despite the fact that they had stayed in the same room before during their time at the Demonic Arts Academy. Unable to understand why she felt so nervous, she desperately tried to calm herself by thinking of sutras. Yowon quietly asked whether they should go inside, snapping Munku out of her thoughts. She hurriedly agreed, her voice unsteady. As soon as they stepped fully into the room, something else caught their attention and left them stunned. The room, which had been described as suitable for 2 people and was larger than expected, contained only a single bed. Munku panicked and hastily claimed that there must have been a mistake, insisting that she would go ask Hobum to change rooms. Before Yowon could stop her, she rushed out. Standing outside, Munku tried to steady her pounding heart, finally realizing how intensely nervous she felt at the thought of staying alone in a small room with the man she loved. Munku reflected inwardly that being left alone in an isolated space with someone one cared for could truly make one this nervous. No matter what, she firmly believed that it was not right for the 2 of them to sleep together on the same bed. She concluded that the room Monk Mu had given them must have been the double bedroom. She walked to Hobum's door and knocked several times. Even though she could clearly sense his presence inside, there was no response, which only deepened her irritation. Growing impatient, she began banging on the door and called out his name loudly. Hobum finally opened the door with sleepy eyes, acting as if he had just woken up, and asked what the matter was. Munku immediately told him that the room their liege was using was wrong, and that there was only 1 bed inside. Hobum reacted with exaggerated innocence, pretending surprise as he repeated that there was only 1 bed. Munku stared at him suspiciously, remarking that his expression was far too questionable. Hobum continued the act, apologizing and claiming that his own room also had only 1 bed. bed, which forced him to sleep on the floor. Munku angrily accused him of lying. Hobum denied it, insisting that there truly was only one bed and explaining that the fourth elder was already asleep. He even asked whether she wanted him to wake the elder up. Frustration overwhelmed Munku, and she let out an irritated sound before turning away. She gave up on arguing and left. As she walked back, Hobum watched her retreating figure with a satisfied smile, thinking to himself that she would thank him later. At that moment, Hobum heard young Danwa's low voice warning him that he was only being allowed to do this once. Hobum immediately acknowledged it with a grin. Munku stopped in front of the room and hesitated. Her heart was pounding uncontrollably and she wondered what she was supposed to do. She found herself unable to bring her hand up to open the door. Just then, the door opened from the inside. Yowon asked whether Hobum had agreed to switch rooms. Munku blushed deeply and shook her head, explaining that Hobum claimed their room also had only one bed. Yowon responded with disbelief, knowing Hobum's personality too well. After a brief pause, Yowon told her to come inside for now. Munku quickly agreed and stepped forward. Yowon told Munku to take the bed, stating that he would spend the night in the lotus position and meditate instead. Munku reacted in surprise. As Yowon repeated the offer, a faint blush appeared on his face, and Munku realized that he was embarrassed as well. The realization felt strange to her as she sensed that she was not the only one feeling nervous in that moment. Munku's thoughts wavered as she noticed Yowon's uncharacteristic shyness, so unlike his usual bold and composed demeanor. The possibility that he might feel the same way caused her heart to race even faster. Yowon assured her that she could sleep first, and that he was fine staying awake. Munku hesitated, questioning him once more, but he calmly reaffirmed his decision. Accepting his words, she smiled, removed her outer clothing, and prepared for bed. Yowon was briefly startled by her movements before realizing her intent and turning his gaze away as she hung her robe. Munku asked whether he intended to keep wearing the human face mask. When Yowon turned back, he froze. Munku had already removed her own skin mask and stood close to him. Her uncovered face, illuminated by the dim candlelight, was so beautiful that Yowon felt his heart pound harder than ever. Embarrassed, Yowon realized his mistake. Munku reached out and removed his mask herself, reminding him that human face masks require daily adhesive. Yowon watched her in silence, captivated by her gentle smile, which was as pure and beautiful as it had been when she first revealed herself to him under the moonlight at the academy. The memory stirred something deep within him, and he realized that his feelings had likely begun back then. Munku, trembling with nervous resolve, asked whether he liked her. Yowon sensed her anxiety as their eyes met, but he struggled to respond. Munku observed his clumsy hesitation and understood that having lost his mother and grown up without affection, he was likely unfamiliar with expressing such feelings. After a moment of silence, Yowon slowly raised his hand and placed it against her cheek. Munku shivered at his touch. Yowon then admitted that since the day they first met, she had remained in his thoughts. He gently pulled her closer. NANO reported that Yowon's heart rate and hormone levels were rising rapidly, and Yowon immediately ordered it to mute. Yowon closed the distance between them, and their lips met. The two shared a kiss. Meanwhile, Hobum was fast asleep in his room, snoring loudly. About an hour later, the fourth elder, young Danwa, carefully stepped out of the dorm room. Judging that it was around midnight, he assumed that everyone else in the inn was already asleep. He quietly made his way to the old man's room and gently opened the door. Inside, he found two beds. One was occupied by a member of the cooking staff, while the other was empty, bearing clear signs that someone had recently gotten up from it. Danwa immediately sensed that something was off and wondered where the old man had gone. Focusing his senses, Danwa searched for any nearby human presence. Although the heavy rain made it difficult, he managed to detect someone not far away. The presence seemed to be coming from the barn. Without hesitation, Danwa slipped out of the inn and moved outside. As he reached the area near the barn, he quickly concealed himself. He had expected to see only the old man, but another man was present as well. The old man was speaking with a man holding an orange tag in his hand. Danwa recognized it instantly, having heard before arriving that an orange tag was required to meet the divine physician. It closely resembled the one carried by the special dispatch squad. Danwa decided to wait and observe, as the man appeared to be a guest who had arrived first. At that moment, something completely unexpected occurred. The old man extended his finger like a sword and pierced straight through the man's forehead. The victim had no time to react and died instantly, his eyes wide open in shock. Danwa was stunned. He had believed the old man to be someone who had never learned martial arts, yet the man was clearly an expert. skilled enough that Danhwa had failed to notice anything unusual about him. The old man muttered that he had wasted too much time obtaining the item and shook his head lightly. Then he turned back and grinned in Danhwa's direction, announcing that it was time to begin hunting the rat. Realizing he had been discovered, Danhwa gritted his teeth in frustration. In the next instant, the old man vanished, leaving behind only an afterimage created by a mirror image technique. Danhwa reacted immediately, drawing his blade and swinging forward. The old man reappeared right in front of him and swiftly retreated to evade the attack. The old man mocked Danhwa, remarking that he was quick to catch on and adding that his back, which had been sore from constantly walking hunched over, felt much better now thanks to him. Soaked by the rain, young Danhwa demanded to know who the old man truly was. The old man laughed and replied that he was nothing more than the owner of the inn. Danhwa immediately dismissed it as a lie. There was no way a mere innkeeper could possess such overwhelming power. As rain poured down, the skin on the old man's face began to loosen and ripple unnaturally, and Danhwa realized that it was a human skin mask. The old man charged again. Danhwa swung his blade to defend, only to feel an immense force surge through the man's finger. Although he managed to block the attack, the impact pushed him back several steps. Without giving him time to recover, the old man pressed forward, attacking from multiple angles in rapid succession, clearly aiming for Danhwa's weak points. Danhwa spun his body and formed a blade barrier, deflecting the incoming attacks and scattering sword chi. Yet before the deflected energy could even settle, the old man was already upon him, striking straight toward his forehead. Startled, Danhwa pulled himself backward, but the old man's kick slammed into his leg. Danhwa cried out as he lost his balance and crashed into the muddy ground. He rolled aside just in time to evade the next attack, as a sharp wave of energy sliced past him, close enough that it would have split him in half had he reacted any slower. Planting his hand against the ground, Danhwa launched himself upward like a spring and released blade chi toward the inn. The blade chi tore past the inn's wall, shattering it completely. The old man shook his head in response and remarked that Danhwa had chosen another step. Danhwa, breathing heavily, had intentionally released that attack to wake everyone inside the inn. The old man grinned coldly and mocked him, stating that Danhwa was struggling in vain and that the people inside were nothing more than empty husks, claiming that Danhwa had only created more corpses instead. Danhwa smiled back and questioned whether that was truly the case. The old man suddenly became a blur and criticized Danhwa for being ostentatious. In the next instant, his figure split into two, attacking Danhwa from different directions. The speed was so extreme that it appeared as though two identical figures were striking at once. Unsure which was real, Danhwa focused his energy into his blade, condensed force chi, and swung it in a wide arc to strike both figures. The first form his blade passed through vanished instantly, revealing itself to be an illusion. The real attack came from the left. The old man laughed in mockery, calling it a shame. A surge of blue sword force chi clashed against Danhwa's blade. It failed to pierce his heart as intended, but instead tore through his left shoulder. Danhwa cried out in pain as blood spilled from the wound. Watching Danhwa stagger, the old man laughed cruelly and declared his intent to send him to hell. He lunged forward, aiming straight for Danhwa's head. At that instant, a sudden presence surged into the battlefield. Sensing the incoming energy, the old man leapt backward. A blue blade force chi sliced through the space he had occupied and crashed into the ground behind him, erupting in a violent explosion that sent debris flying. Danhwa immediately realized who had intervened. His expression brightened as Yowon appeared before him. The old man assessed the situation inwardly, understanding that Danhwa had attacked near the inn to draw Yowon out. He acknowledged that he had mistaken Yowon for a mere young fool, and realized that Yowon had been concealing his true power. Yowon recognized that the man was far more than an innkeeper, and demanded to know his identity. The old man remained silent. At that moment, the sounds of people pouring out of the inn reached them. The old man snorted lightly, remarking that Danhwa's life had been saved by the interruption. Leaving those words behind, he leapt away. Yowon immediately fired a force chi bullet after him and shouted for him to stop. Without even turning back, the old man evaded the attack effortlessly and vanished from sight. Yowon hesitated briefly, considering pursuit, but ultimately stopped. He could no longer sense the man's energy, which meant the old man was either equal to him in strength or even stronger. Turning his attention back to Danhwa, Yowon pressed several blood points around Danhwa's shoulder, stopping the bleeding. He informed Danhwa that he had applied pressure to the wound and instructed him to return inside so it could be properly treated. Young Danhwa expressed his gratitude to Yowon when Jinjumu and his group suddenly rushed toward them. Jinjumu arrived in shock, reacting to the scene before him and questioning what had occurred. Danhwa explained that they had been ambushed and that while he had gone to check on his horse, the inn owner, the old man, had murdered someone. The word of murder immediately caused alarm. Another group of warriors hurried toward the barn, and anguished cries followed as they discovered their fallen leader lying dead. The man who had gone to question the innkeeper had been killed instead. Grief and anger spread among them as they searched the body, only to realize that the orange tag was missing. Panic set in. They began searching the surroundings before rushing back to Danhwa, demanding confirmation. Danhwa, suppressing his pain, stated that he had witnessed the murder with his own eyes, and explained that the old man had fled toward the valley just as everyone was about to come outside. Realizing that the item had been taken, the group immediately decided to pursue the killer. Despite the heavy rain and darkness of the night, they brought out their horses, retrieved their dead leader, and departed the inn in haste. Watching this unfold, Jinjumu reflected with lingering shock. The old man he had known for years had revealed himself to be a master of martial arts and had even murdered a customer. All Jinjumu had wanted was information, yet they had nearly lost their lives instead. Seeing the severity of Danhwa's condition, Yowon stated that Danhwa was losing too much blood and needed to be taken back to his room to rest. Jinjumu agreed without hesitation. Yowon supported Danhwa as they moved back inside. Nearby, a monk quietly whispered to Jinjumu, confirming that he had noticed something unusual. They acknowledged that Yowon was wearing a human skin mask. Suspicion briefly arose over whether Yowon and Danhwa could be connected to the murder or the disappearance of the old man, but that doubt was dismissed. Jinjumu reasoned that although both of them used blades, the fatal wound on the dead man had been caused by a sword, not a blade. Even so, the presence of a skin mask ensured that Yowon remained a suspicious figure. The abandoned Sword Valley was a land steeped in secrets. After all, Jinjumu lifted his gaze to the storm-filled sky as thunder roared above. He sensed that treacherous winds were once again beginning to stir within the abandoned Sword Valley. Early the next morning, the heavy rain had completely stopped, as if it had never fallen at all. Yowon surveyed the surroundings and noticed that the Wutang sect ascetics were no longer present. He judged that they must have slipped away at dawn, likely due to what had occurred the previous night. After the incident, Yowon and the monks woke the kitchen staff to question them about the old man. The staff member insisted that he knew nothing, swearing that he was telling the truth. He explained that about a month earlier, the old man had disappeared for roughly 5 days before returning. He admitted that something had felt off at the time, but since the old man had always possessed a bad temperament, he had chosen to overlook it. Yowon reflected on the detail of the 5-day disappearance, concluding that it matched the amount of time required to create a human skin mask using the old man's face. The monks' expressions darkened. Through their telepathic exchange, they realized that the timing coincided exactly with when they had lost contact with him, and they agreed that they needed to move quickly. By tapping into their telepathic messages, Yowon became certain that there had been more unfolding beneath the surface. Yowon reasoned inwardly that the Wutang ascetics' hurried departure was likely connected to the man mentioned earlier. He concluded that the truth would eventually be revealed, since they were most likely heading toward the abandoned Sword Valley. Hobum informed Danhwa that he would go prepare the horses, and Danhwa gave his approval. As Hobum headed toward the barn, his gaze briefly landed on Yowon and Munku. Yowon was playfully taking the food and water from Munku's hands, while she protested and tried to get them back from him. Seeing this, Hobum broke into a grin and turned away, silently wishing Yowon good fortune in his matters of the heart. As they continued riding on horseback, the forest grew increasingly dense, thick fog swallowing the path ahead until it was impossible to see forward. Hobum voiced his concern, noting that the grass was far too overgrown for proper riding and expressing doubt about whether they were even heading in the right direction. Yowon responded that he had been keeping his senses heightened to detect any presence, but searching through the area felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. NANO reported that it had begun mapping the area, reaching 5% completion. Yowon observed everything through augmented reality as they advanced. When Hobum hesitated at a junction and wondered whether they should turn right, Yowon immediately corrected him and ordered a left turn. Hobum acknowledged the command without question. Yowon noted inwardly that at the very least, NANO ensured they would not become lost. A faint resonant sound soon drifted toward them from the distance. Danhwa sensed it as well and turned in the same direction with a grim expression. When he asked whether Yowon had felt it too, Yowon nodded. Hobum and Munku, unable to sense anything themselves, watched the two with confusion. Yowon stated that something was nearby and decided to investigate. Danhwa acknowledged the order at once. Though still confused, Hobum followed Danhwa's guidance, pushing through thicker bushes as they picked up speed. With every step forward, the sound grew sharper and clearer. Yowon sensed that the energy in the area was unusually keen, resembling the presence of something tied to a legendary weapon. Then another sensation struck them. amid the humid forest air, the distinct smell of blood suddenly cut through. Yo-won concluded that they were close and ordered everyone to hurry, warning that the victim could be anyone. They rushed toward the source, and to the east, a clearing marked by countless sword traces came into view. The moment they arrived, Munku frowned and turned her face away. The surrounding bushes were drenched in blood, and bodies lay scattered, severed cleanly in half. Yo-won's expression hardened as he recognized them as the same people who had chased after the old man the previous night, questioning whether they had encountered him again. Hobum confirmed that they were indeed the same group they had seen at the inn and observed that their deaths were recent. Yo-won carefully examined the scene. He noted that it had been raining when they chased the old man, yet the condition of the bloodstains suggested that the deaths had occurred after the rain had stopped. He immediately ordered NANO to analyze the situation. NANO reported that based on the state of blood coagulation and the rigidity of the muscles, the victims had been dead for roughly an hour. Yo-won processed the information inwardly. An hour was not long, yet it was enough time for the enemy to have gained significant distance. He recalled that there had been 3 people in the group, but only 2 bodies were present. The last one was missing. Considering their level of martial arts, Yo-won judged that the missing person should not have been capable of escaping on their own. Danhwa then reported that he had found footprints belonging to 2 people. Because the rain had not completely dried, the tracks were still visible, and they were leading in a specific direction. Yo-won confirmed that the direction matched the source of the strange resonance they had been sensing. With his command, the group began following the footprints. After about 10 minutes of walking, they reached the edge of the bushes. At that point, the muddy ground abruptly gave way to solid rock, and the footprints vanished completely. Munku reacted in awe, realizing she had never known such a place existed. As they emerged from the forest, they found themselves in a vast open area. Dense fog still obscured much of the surroundings, but looming ahead of them was a massive stone wall. Munku stared upward in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the towering rock formation. Yo-won stated that this was clearly the direction from which the resonance was emanating. The sound returned once more. Yo-won turned toward it and gasped. Danhwa followed his gaze and was equally stunned. At first, the fog had hidden it, but as they moved closer, it became unmistakably clear. Carved deeply into the surface of the colossal stone wall was a single enormous sword. Hobum and Munku turned as well, falling completely silent as the sight left them speechless. Hobum suddenly cried out in alarm as he noticed the danger ahead. Yo-won halted instantly, realizing that a sheer cliff lay directly in front of him. Munku cautiously peered down, muttered in disbelief at the depth below, and quickly stepped back. As Hobum began to warn them to be careful, his words were cut short. Munku gasped sharply as she stared downward, stunned by what she was seeing. Yo-won felt a deep shiver run through him the longer he observed the scene. The enormous sword engraving appeared to symbolize an unmatched level of swordsmanship. More unsettling was the fact that he recognized the style of the carving, as if he had seen that handwriting somewhere before. Munku suddenly pointed something out beneath the giant sword carving, drawing Yo-won's attention. Embedded below it were countless swords, all stuck into the stone wall at various angles like the spines of a hedgehog. There were not just a few, but hundreds of them. Yo-won was deeply shaken. He realized that the resonance they had sensed originated from the massive sword engraving itself. The lingering energy from the carving was influencing the embedded swords, causing sound waves to ripple through the area. Despite the carving having existed for a long time, its power had not faded. Even warriors of the evolutionary realm would not be sufficient to leave behind such enduring force. As Yo-won continued to examine the scene, understanding dawned on him. If so many swords had been abandoned here, then this place could only be the abandoned Sword Valley itself. At that moment, Danhwa sensed something and urgently sent a telepathic alert. He reported the presence of another human nearby. Yo-won immediately tore his focus away from the sword engraving and sharpened his senses, confirming that a person was indeed close, positioned near the stone wall. Danhwa quickly called Hobum through telepathy and snapped him out of his dazed state. Hobum jolted in panic, having been mesmerized by the sword carving. Danhwa ordered everyone to regain composure and follow him. Leading the group downward and toward the right side of the massive carving, Danhwa guided them along the wall. There they encountered another startling sight. Lined across the stone surface were roughly 20 cave entrances carved deep into the rock face. Yo-won considered the possibility that the divine physician might be within one of the caves. His concern deepened as there had been no traces of people when they first entered the forest. Munku conveyed through telepathy that there were far far too many caves, and Yowon heightened his senses, realizing that many of them were likely decoys. Yowon identified a specific cave and indicated it as the correct one. Danhwa sensed the same thing and nodded in agreement. However, a serious problem remained. The cliff separating them from the cave entrance was vast, requiring a leap of over 30 meters. Yowon assessed the situation inwardly. Hobum was only at the ultimate peak level, and Munku was at the peak level. The distance was too great for them to cross safely on their own. A single misstep would mean falling to their deaths. Yowon asked Danhwa whether he could carry Hobum across the gap. Danhwa acknowledged that he could. Yowon then turned his attention to Munku and questioned whether she believed she could make the jump. Munku looked at the distance and hesitated. Before she could respond, Yowon offered to carry her if she could not manage it herself. She immediately stopped herself from objecting and nodded eagerly, finding no reason to refuse. With the decision made, Yowon lifted Munku into his arms. She clasped her hands together and smiled brightly. Yowon instructed her to hold on tightly. Munku wrapped her arms firmly around him. Channeling energy into his feet, Yowon sprinted toward the cliff. His body launched into the air, clearing the vast gap in a single bound, and he landed precisely at the cave entrance. Hobum jokingly asked Danhwa to take good care of him. Danhwa frowned, turned his back toward him, and made it clear that he had no intention of carrying another man in his arms. He told Hobum to climb onto his back instead. Hobum reluctantly agreed and mounted him. The moment Hobum settled on his back, Danhwa said nothing further. He immediately sprinted forward and leapt across the cliff. After they landed safely at the cave entrance, Hobum trembled as relief washed over him, feeling as though his heart had nearly stopped. When Hobum got down, Danhwa released his grip, causing Hobum to drop awkwardly onto his back. Danhwa immediately noticed an unusual scent and remarked that something smelled burnt. Nearby, Yowon crouched down and touched a black powder scattered on the ground. He examined it closely, then brought his fingers to his nose. The powder carried the same burnt smell that filled the cave. Yowon questioned what it was and asked NANO to analyze it. NANO quickly identified the substance as fire powder. Yowon recognized it as explosive powder and frowned, questioning why gunpowder would be present inside a cave. The situation felt wrong. He could clearly sense a presence deeper within, faint and dull, along with a trembling ray of light. When asked what to do, Yowon instructed the others to wait where they were. He decided to investigate alone. He activated Nano's night vision, and his vision adjusted as his eyes absorbed far lighter than before. The interior of the cave became visible, though the distance still obscured the details. Yowon advanced 10 steps inside and detected a figure far ahead. He ordered Nano to zoom in. As the image sharpened, Yowon was startled to realize that the cave ended there. At the dead end, a man was sitting alone, shaking his head frantically. Yowon immediately recognized the man. He was one of the members from the group that had been found dead earlier. The man was bound tightly with ropes, yet his head was free, and he shook it frantically with a pale, terrified expression. Yowon noticed a small torch held near the man's mouth, fashioned from thin pieces of wood. His eyes then shifted, and his breath caught. Nearby lay a massive amount of fire powder piled within the cave. The man finally lost his strength. The wooden torch slipped from his mouth and fell to the ground, rolling slowly until it came into contact with the fire powder. The moment it touched, the powder ignited. A deafening explosion erupted inside the cave, and flames burst outward like lightning. Yowon instantly deactivated night vision and shouted for everyone to get out. At the same time, he gathered every ounce of his internal energy, forcing it to surge through his body. As the fire swallowed him, he released that energy in a single burst, blasting it toward all three of them. Their bodies were hurled outward like cannonballs, launched from the cave just as the flames reached the entrance. Munku and Hobum screamed as they were flung across the gap and sent flying toward the opposite side of the cliff. As she was thrown through the air, Munku desperately twisted her body and looked back. Through the roaring flames, she saw Yowon engulfed in fire, violently expelled from the cave. His body plunged downward, vanishing into the depths of the cliff below. Munku screamed in despair as Yowon disappeared from sight. Both of them tried to throw themselves after him, but Danhwa seized them and held them back, knowing that jumping after him would mean certain death. Munku struggled violently, tears streaming from her reddened eyes as she screamed to be released. Danhwa struck her to snap her out of it and shouted at her to wake up, telling her that throwing her life away would only make Yowon's sacrifice meaningless. The words shattered her. It had not even been a full day since she had come to understand Yowon's feelings, and now he was gone. Overwhelmed by grief, her strength left her completely. She collapsed to the ground and began to wail uncontrollably. Hobum, still staring toward the cliff, was unable to restrain his emotions either. His cries echoed through the fog-filled valley. No one had imagined that such a catastrophe could unfold in such a short span of time. Danhwa cursed under his breath as he clenched his fist until blood seeped through his fingers. He had stopped Munku and Hobum from throwing themselves into the abyss, yet the despair crushing his own chest was no different. The one he was sworn to protect had saved him instead, and that truth left him unable to even put his grief into words. Before their sorrow could settle, movement stirred within the bushes. Danhwa turned sharply. The old man from the inn stepped out, laughing loudly as he mocked them, boasting that the wrong group had fallen perfectly into his trap. Rage twisted Danhwa's expression as he recognized him. The old man grinned back, remarking that it would have been troublesome if that one man had still been present, and expressing satisfaction that Yowon had fallen from the cliff without him having to lift a finger. Munku's tear-filled eyes hardened as fury surged through her. She glared at the old man, unable to endure his delight over Yowon's apparent death. The old man sneered at her, mocking how she had been crying moments earlier, before acknowledging her tenacity. Even so, he released a powerful surge of energy and declared that she would not last long. Danhwa's gaze darkened. The pressure radiating from the old man was far greater than it had been the previous night. The old man declared that he was busy and intended to end it quickly before charging forward. An hour later, deep within a forest nearly 5 miles away from the abandoned Sword Valley, the old man staggered forward, barely able to maintain his footing. His breathing was ragged as he reflected that his luck had not held. He paused and spread his senses to check for pursuers. He bitterly acknowledged that if it had not been for that woman attacking him with such ferocity, he would have wiped them out quickly and dealt with her as well. The memory of Munku's eyes, filled with the intent to kill, remained vividly etched in his mind. The situation had worsened when the man he had used as bait joined the battle, forcing him to suffer internal injuries and retreat. Still, he dismissed it as inconsequential. He now knew which cave that man had emerged from. Once he treated his wounds, all that remained was to track the trail further. At that moment, he sensed numerous presences closing in. He showed no surprise. A man stepped forward and dropped to one knee before him, formally greeting him as the master of Blade Sword Sect. The old man's lips slowly curled into a satisfied grin. Chun Yowon's body was swallowed by the flames erupting from behind him. A scream tore from his throat as he was blasted out of the cave, his body burning as it plunged helplessly into the abyss. In that fleeting instant, he caught sight of Munku's face, twisted in despair as she watched him fall from the cliff. NANO immediately activated self-healing mode, beginning to repair the burns caused by the explosion, even as Yowon continued to fall. The searing pain faded rapidly, but the descent did not slow. His body was still dropping at terrifying speed. Yowon realized just how deep the chasm was as NANO issued repeated danger warnings, alerting him that his falling velocity was increasing. As the darkness rushed past him, fear finally seized Yowon. The thought that he might truly die here surfaced in his mind. His body suddenly slammed into the rock wall, only to be violently thrown aside by a powerful gust of wind that hurled him in another direction. Pain exploded through him, but he refused to accept this end. The fear of dying was eclipsed by something even stronger. Yowon had not yet finished what he set out to do. The image of Munku surfaced again, especially the fact that the last expression he had seen on her face was filled with grief right after he had finally confessed his feelings to her. That realization sharpened his resolve completely. He refused to let that moment be their last. As violent currents of wind flung his body through the abyss, Yowon suddenly noticed something and gasped. An idea formed instantly. He reached behind his waist and confirmed that it was still there. Summoning all his remaining strength, Yowon swung the white dragon blade downward and drove it into the rock wall. The blade bit deep, carving through the stone as it lodged itself firmly. The sudden resistance sent a devastating shock through Yowon's body. His right shoulder bone and several ribs shattered under the strain as he fought against gravity itself. Despite the agony, Yowon continued to cling on. After falling straight down for roughly 15 more meters, the resistance from the embedded blade finally began to slow his descent. Moments later, the blade held, bringing him to a halt. Yowon realized it had worked. It had been terrifyingly close, but he had stopped himself from falling any further. NANO reported that Yowon's shoulder had been dislocated and fractured, and that his right third rib was broken, then immediately initiated self-healing on the injured areas. Yowon assessed the situation and judged that there was not much distance left to the bottom of the cliff. From that height, he could safely jump down using his agility technique. Once the pain subsided, he pulled the white dragon blade free from the rock wall and dropped the remaining distance, landing safely below. Upon reaching the ground, his body finally relaxed and he slumped down, releasing a long breath of relief. Yoan acknowledged that martial arts did not make him immortal and that death could come at any moment depending on the situation. Setting that aside, he focused on the immediate problem of returning to the top of the cliff and instructed Nano to activate night vision. With night vision engaged, Yoan scanned the surroundings and noticed countless swords scattered throughout the area. However, they were all so old and rusted that they could barely be considered swords anymore. As his gaze continued to roam, he realized that swords were not the only things present. Skulls and bones were strewn everywhere, clearly belonging to people who had fallen into the chasm and died over time. Yoan hesitated briefly before removing a piece of clothing from one of the skeletons and putting it on. His own clothes had been badly burned in the explosion and were no longer wearable. Even as he wore it, he felt discomfort at the thought of using a dead person's clothing. As he observed the area more closely, Yoan questioned why so many people had died here. The remains appeared to be from different periods, suggesting that deaths had occurred repeatedly over a long time. Combined with the abandoned swords and the violent whirlwind above, it became clear that climbing back up was virtually impossible. He reasoned that this must be why no information about this place existed and wondered whether there was truly no other way out. Determined not to overlook anything, Yoan began exploring the surroundings carefully. As he moved around the massive rock formation, he suddenly came to a halt. His eyes widened in shock when he noticed something unexpected. Carved across the giant rock were numerous traces left by swords and blades, etched deeply into the stone. Yoan realized that he had fallen into this place due to the explosion, but the marks around him suggested that others had come down here before and fought. As he examined the traces more closely, his eyes widened. The sword and blade marks carved into the rock felt unmistakably familiar. He identified them as techniques of the heavenly demon sword art. Yoan confirmed that the movements were nearly identical, aside from a few techniques. He concluded that these carvings must have been created before the ones on the sapphire gravestone, which explained why the handwriting had felt familiar. It belonged to the founding heavenly demon. That figure was known to have conquered Sichuan province, Hebei province, and Anhui province, making it plausible that he had fought someone here. However, Yoan also recognized that several of the marks had clearly been created using the techniques of the Berserk Saber God. The Berserk Saber God was said to have appeared 500 years ago, which raised another question in Yoan's mind about whether that figure also had predecessors. As he studied the movements further, he realized that some of them were entirely unfamiliar. They were far more powerful than the 6 movements he had learned from the Berserk Saber God's techniques. Aside from the founding heavenly demon's final movement, the level of these techniques was essentially equal. Yoan acknowledged the coincidence and ordered Nano to scan everything. Nano confirmed and began recording. As Yoan continued observing, he noticed one sword mark that was clearly different from the others. It had been carved through repeated slashes, identical to the markings the founding heavenly demon had left on the sapphire gravestone. He questioned why such writing had been placed beneath all the other sword marks and confirmed with Nano that all markings had been fully captured. After receiving confirmation, Yoan instructed Nano to analyze them using augmented reality. Nano initiated the process. White lines traced through the carved marks, and complex sword paths appeared before Yoan's eyes. The movements revealed themselves as complete formations. Yoan was stunned. The sword skill surpassed conventional body movements, matching the same transcendent principle he had sensed in the Berserk Saber God's blade techniques. Yoan realized that the founding heavenly demon might have been attempting to combine the heavenly demon sword art with the Berserk Saber God's techniques. Elsewhere, within a region entirely enclosed by massive rock formations, lay a hidden space that could only be seen from above through an opening in the ceiling. Inside that secluded area stood a large mansion. This was the hideout of the Divine Physician, concealed deep within the great rock of the abandoned Sword Valley. The fourth elder of the demonic cult, Young Danhwa, let out a painful groan as agony coursed through him. An old woman pressed firmly against his head to keep him from moving, scolding him to endure it properly. She was the Divine Physician, Gamrosu. A line of sword chi had torn across his face, starting from his right forehead and cutting down past his eye. As a result, he had completely lost vision in his right eye. Danhwa accepted this grim reality inwardly. He knew he would never be able to use his right eye again, yet he was grateful to have survived at all. Under normal circumstances, he would have lost control and charged recklessly, but Warden Mun had remained rational, supporting his attacks while accurately targeting the old man's weaknesses. That was the only reason they had been able to hold out until that person appeared. Even so, Danhwa found it astonishing. Munku might might be the first female warrior in 20 years capable of standing on equal ground with Yin Moha. Nearby, Munku was crying uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands, while Ho Sangwa held her tightly. They were inside the Divine Physician's hideout. Hobum was also sobbing, his body slumped as Baekji sat beside him in stunned silence, repeatedly muttering that he could not believe what had happened. Gamrosu observed them quietly and remarked that they must have all been close to him. Seeing everyone grieving like this, she concluded that he must have been blessed with good people around him. Danwa attempted to speak again about the medical request he had mentioned earlier, but Gamrosu pressed firmly against his wound while applying medicine, cutting him off with a sharp surge of pain. She then glanced toward the entrance where two warriors stood watching her closely. Danwa noticed her unease and realized her behavior was unusual. Sensing something was wrong, he stopped speaking. Gamrosu instructed him to rest, stating that he would require treatment for at least 7 days. She then left the building, accompanied by the two warriors who remained close at her side. After she departed, a telepathic message reached Danwa, asking whether he had noticed it. He turned and saw Yin Moha standing nearby with her arms crossed. Danwa responded through telepathy, stating that it seemed the Divine Physician was being watched, and that they might be as well. He asked Yin Moha what was truly happening. Yin Moha let out a quiet sigh, and replied that they had been attacked upon arriving. When she and the others had first reached Sword Valley, warriors from the hidden mansion had confronted them immediately, demanding to know who they were and why they had come. Yin Moha had presented the orange tag, explaining that they were there to meet the Divine Physician. Upon seeing the tag, the warriors' hostility had eased, replaced by interest, and they acknowledged that Yin Moha's group were guests, apologizing for their earlier rudeness. Yin Moha explained that she had initially believed everything was proceeding smoothly thanks to the jade plaque. However, the situation changed abruptly when the inn owner and 3 experts appeared without warning and ambushed them. In that brief moment, members of the Darkness sect were killed instantly, and even 2 warriors from the manor lost their lives. The 3 accompanying experts were on the same level as the old man himself. The inn owner's strength was overwhelming, and Yin Moha admitted that she had barely managed to hold him back. The tide only turned when another individual appeared and helped drive the old man away. Young Danwa asked whether Yin Moha could identify the person who had intervened, since she too had received help. Yin Moha confirmed that she could. She stated that it was someone Danwa would certainly have heard of before, Elder Hing Wunja of the Wu-Tang sect. She explained that Hing Wunja was counted among the 5 greatest masters said to stand at the very peak of the martial world. Beneath those 5 were 9 exceptional martial artists rumored to become the next generation of masters, collectively known as the Hydra. Among them, Hing Wunja, known as the Wise One, was a legendary figure whose name was widely respected across all factions. Yin Moha continued, stating that they had managed to reach the current location thanks to Hing Wunja's assistance. Even so, as the situation now stood, they were failing to persuade the Divine Physician. Danwa reasoned that there had to be some hidden motive behind the Divine Physician's guarded attitude. He expressed relief that Hing Wunja did not yet know their true identities. Yin Moha, however, questioned how long that ignorance would last. With 2 evolutionary realm masters among them, she suspected that Hing Wunja might already be aware and could be intending to use them for his own purposes. Meanwhile, in another building, an old man was speaking with several monks, the same ones who had been present at the inn the previous night. Jinju Mu addressed him, finally understanding why contact had been lost, and acknowledged him as Elder Hing. Hing Wunja confirmed it, explaining that he had been unable to act earlier because the old man disguised as the inn owner and his group had surrounded the abandoned Sword Valley. Jinju Mu suggested relocating either to the noble Jagal family residence or to Mount Wu-Tang, reasoning that if the Divine Physician had nearly completed her principles, there was no need to remain in one place. Hing Wunja responded that although their actions were for the sake of the so-called blue skies, there were still lines that could not be crossed. He acknowledged that their enemies had already figured things out, and since their current location was known, it was only a matter of time before an invasion occurred. He agreed that they should move. Jinju Mu then questioned why Hing Wunja had chosen to help that particular group, pointing out that they were clearly either members of the demonic cult or forces aligned with evil. Another monk supported the suspicion, noting that one of them had concealed his identity behind a mask and that they were also seeking the Divine Physician. Hing Wunja explained his reasoning calmly. He intended to control one group through another. By using them as a shield against their enemies, he planned to secure time and space to move the Divine Physician safely to Mount Wu-Tang. At the same time, far below the cliff, violent gusts of wind surged through the darkness. Yoan moved swiftly within it, his sword carving through the air as he trained relentlessly. He had been practicing sword formations for 2 full hours, but what he was attempting now was entirely different from anything he had mastered before. A sequence that had been flowing smoothly suddenly broke. The moment the movements failed to connect, Yoan's body shook violently. The disruption forced him to stop. His breathing grew heavy as exhaustion overtook him, and he collapsed to the ground, sweat pouring down his forehead. Yowon reflected on the difficulty of what he was attempting. Unlike himself, who had stopped after mastering a completed martial art, the founding heavenly demon had pursued something new after gaining enlightenment through the Berserk Saber God's techniques. That attempt had ultimately failed, most likely because of the limits of the human body. The Berserk Saber God's techniques were only complete when one reached the absolute limits of humanity. Even those born with bodies perfectly suited for martial arts were still bound by human constraints. That impossibility was the reason the founding heavenly demon had carved that word into the stone wall. Yowon recognized that he was different. Through relentless training, he had already surpassed normal human capacity. He had successfully replicated the experimental movements the founding heavenly demon had once attempted. That alone proved it was possible. The greatest challenge was that the technique was incomplete. He had to merge the two systems himself, building upon what the founding heavenly demon had already begun. Because the original heavenly demon sword art was already perfectly balanced, combining it required creating an entirely new movement rather than simply adding to it. Determined, Yowon resumed. Using nano simulations as reference, Yowon continued analyzing the sword techniques, but he deliberately chose to push his body beyond comfort instead of relying solely on calculations. He repeatedly threw himself against his limits, testing countless variations in an effort to merge the techniques through trial and failure. 2 more hours passed in relentless repetition. Continuous failure, adjustment, and execution drained him completely. The prolonged use of the heavenly demon sword art left his body utterly exhausted. Yowon realized that the basic sword technique and the limit-breaking sword technique refused to merge. The balance between them was the problem. Then clarity struck. He understood that he did not need to preserve every part of the basic sword technique. When balance was broken, discarding certain elements was necessary. True freedom could not exist under rigid restriction. Balance required openness, not confinement. The instant that realization settled, something unexpected occurred. Brilliant light erupted from Yowon's body. The surrounding space began to churn violently as if a storm had been born around him. Environmental energy surged inward, flowing directly through his body. While seated in meditation, Yowon began to change. The evolutionary realm was achieved through the unification of all previously accumulated inner energy. A master who reached that realm could merge their inner energies into one. However, beyond it lay another level, one defined not by unification alone, but by freedom. When balance was achieved between the inner and outer worlds, and chi could be controlled without restriction, martial artists called that state the mystic realm. Meanwhile, at the divine physician's shelter, Gamrosu was summoned by Hing Wunja. Clearly irritated, she questioned why she had been called when she was already busy. Hing Wunja calmly stated that he had an important message to deliver. When Gamrosu pressed him to explain, he informed her that they would need to pack what was necessary and leave, either at dawn or early in the morning. Gamrosu reacted with open anger. She shouted in disbelief, demanding to know whether he was suggesting that they abandon the abandoned Sword Valley. She reminded him that this was not what they had agreed upon. She had stayed to conduct her research there in exchange for complying with his conditions, and she was supposed to remain until the principles were fully completed. Hing Wunja acknowledged that their original agreement had been to stay, but insisted that the situation had changed. Gamrosu demanded to know what exactly had changed, arguing that hostile forces had always surrounded the valley and questioning why this suddenly warranted abandoning their arrangement. Hing Wunja replied that she knew this was different. The current threat was far more dangerous. If she were kidnapped before completing the principle, everything they had planned would be ruined. He reminded her that she had promised to help for the sake of martial arts and urged her to allow them to protect her from what he called evil forces. Hing Wunja's pressure was relentless. Gamrosu's eyes trembled with fury, but she remained silent. Taking her silence as consent, Hing Wunja smiled and instructed her to be prepared before sunrise. He then dismissed her, allowing her to return to her office to pack. After she left, a man dressed in dark clothing entered and reported. He confirmed that suspicious movements had been detected throughout the forest surrounding the valley. The number of people outside was steadily increasing, and they were expected to move in by morning. Hing Wunja concluded that they needed to hurry. When the man asked whether they intended to use another group as bait, referring to Chun Yo-won's party, Hing Wunja smiled without hesitation. He stated that they would serve their purpose well, and confirmed that they would depart as soon as the divine physician finished packing. training. The scout acknowledged the order and withdrew. Back in her office, Gamrosu returned in silence. Unable to contain her rage, she let out a strained sound and hurled a dish used for holding herbs across the room. In her thoughts, Gamrosu cursed her situation. Everywhere she turned, trouble followed. To her, there was little difference between the Wu-Tang ascetics and the forces lurking outside the valley. Either way, they would drag her away by force even if she refused. The thought of being forced to abandon the place her family had lived in for generations filled her with bitterness. Realizing she had no choice, Gamrosu resolved to take as much as she could with her. She moved to the bookshelf on the left side of the room and pulled out a volume labeled Herb List. When Gamrosu opened the book, she found a smaller volume hidden inside. This inner book was made from a different material, and when she opened it, dense writing and simplified characters filled the pages, difficult to decipher at a glance. Alongside the text were detailed illustrations of the human body shown from the inside out. To any physician, it was an invaluable treasure. Gamrosu acknowledged inwardly that she would need this book to complete her project. It was a legacy passed down through her ancestors. She slipped it into her inner pocket and continued packing the tools and materials she would need. At that moment, noise rose from outside her room. Someone insisted that the doctor was busy, while another argued loudly that a patient had arrived and that treating the sick was a doctor's duty. Annoyed yet curious, Gamrosu opened the door to see what was happening. Standing outside were Hobom and Ho Sangwa, with Hobom supporting her as she struggled to stand. Hobom accused them of cruelty for abandoning a sick patient. Gamrosu stepped forward and placed her hand on Ho Sangwa's wrist to check her pulse. Her expression shifted subtly as she sensed something unusual. When one of the warriors asked whether the condition was serious, Gamrosu paused briefly before nodding. She stated that she needed to examine her and assured them it would not take long. Reluctantly, the warrior agreed and allowed them inside. Gamrosu guided Ho Sangwa into the room and helped her lie down on the bed. She then turned to the warriors who had followed them in and firmly ordered all the men to stay outside. Hobom immediately pushed them back, urging everyone to leave. The warriors protested, insisting that they needed to protect her. Hobom exploded in anger, shouting that they should be ashamed as men for even thinking of looking at a woman's body. The warriors were left stunned, momentarily unable to respond. Gamrosu shot them a sharp glare and demanded to know why they were still standing there. With that, they fell silent and complied. Hobom ushered them out and closed the door behind him. As he did, he glanced back with a satisfied grin, knowing that his plan had worked. Yowon drew in a slow, deep breath, released it steadily, and opened his right fist. He assessed his condition with calm clarity. His chi reserves were nearly depleted, yet the speed at which his chi recovered by drawing in natural energy was incomparable to before. Although the movements he had been working on were still not perfectly balanced, the power behind his attacks had increased by 2 to 3 times, far surpassing his strength at the evolutionary realm. He recognized it as extraordinary fortune. He had reached the mystic realm. Yowon quickly scanned his surroundings and realized he had lingered far too long. Immersed in his focus, he had lost track of time. Monku and the others would surely believe he was dead by now. He needed to return immediately. However, the massive stone wall towering above him posed a problem. He could not yet find a path upward. After a moment of thought, Yowon looked at the countless swords embedded in the ground and the rock wall. Understanding dawned on him. He no longer needed to search for a path. He could create one himself. The instant he acted, a violent gust of wind slammed into him, throwing off his balance and disrupting his stepping technique. As he tried to recover, the rusted sword beneath his foot shattered under the strain. Yowon lost his footing and plunged downward, screaming as he fell back into the abyss. All the progress he had made was on the verge of being undone. Refusing to accept it, Yowon instantly drew the white dragon blade and drove it into the stone wall. Since he had not yet fallen far, the blade held, stopping his descent before he was dragged too deep. Hanging there, Yowon cursed his miscalculation. He had believed that securing footholds would be enough, but he had failed to account for the violent winds. Even the Great Guardian, a master of stepping techniques, would not have managed such a climb under these conditions. There was no alternative left. Yowon chose the most direct and reliable method. The black metal coating both his arms dispersed and reshaped itself into a black sword. He plunged the blade deep into the stone, using it like a saber, and began climbing slowly and steadily. He acknowledged that it would take time, but this was the only safe way forward. At the same time, within the hidden mansion of the abandoned Sword Valley, a man dressed in black entered Hingwonja's room. He reported that everything was ready and that the divine physician had finished preparing. Hingwonja confirmed whether the others were still asleep and was assured that they were being closely watched. Hingwonja issued his orders calmly. The divine physician was to be escorted through the secret passageway under guard, while he himself would depart with the monks of his sect. The man bowed deeply and left the room, leaving Hingwonja alone with his thoughts. Hing Wonja reveled inwardly, confident that they would be long gone by the time anyone realized what had happened. If the sapphire gravestone and its security system were undone, the forces waiting outside would immediately invade. To him, it was a flawless strategy, using one group of enemies to destroy another. The man in black accepted his final mission and headed toward the medical room. As he arrived in front of the building, an uneasy feeling crept over him. There were supposed to be 2 watchers stationed on the roof, yet not a single presence could be sensed. Suspicion rising, he carefully opened the door and peered inside. In the dim room, 5 shadows lay on the beds. He heard faint breathing and initially concluded that they were still asleep, yet something was wrong. He stepped inside, his expression darkening. There should have been 6 people in the room, not 5. His heart sank as he moved closer and examined the face of the nearest person. The realization hit him hard. The one lying on the bed was a watcher who should have been stationed on the roof. His blood points had been sealed, rendering him unconscious. The man hurriedly checked the others and confirmed the worst. All of them were watchers assigned to guard duty. They were all gone. He rushed out of the medical room and sprinted toward Gamrosu's office, questioning whether the sleeping medicine had failed. Along the way, he barked orders, and nearby warriors immediately followed. When he reached the office, he kicked the door open with force, splintering it apart. The room was empty. Gamrosu was nowhere to be seen. Only 2 warriors, who had supposedly been guarding the entrance, lay collapsed on the floor. Other warriors hurried over and checked their condition. Both were dead. Panic set in. Realizing that the situation had spiraled completely out of control, the man bolted outside and shouted at the top of his lungs that the divine physician was missing, ordering everyone to find her immediately. His cries echoed through the mansion, throwing the entire compound into chaos as warriors scattered to search every corner. Without wasting another second, the man turned and ran toward the secret passageway to report directly to Hing Wonja, who should have been waiting there. When he arrived, he froze. Standing outside the secret passage were monks of the Wu-Tang sect, already gathered and waiting. The monks struggled as they tried to force the secret passage open, but it would not budge. The lever beside it, meant to activate the mechanism, had already been destroyed, leaving several monks straining in vain against the sealed door. The black-clothed man spotted Hing Wonja among them and rushed forward. Hing Wonja shot back in fury, and the man hurriedly reported that all 6 people assigned to the medical room were missing along with the divine physician. He added that he had ordered a full search of the mansion, but before he could finish, Hing Wonja stomped the ground in rage. He shouted that searching was pointless. The secret exit had already been destroyed, and the divine physician had escaped. There was no one left to find inside the mansion. The man froze in shock as the implication sank in. He realized that the divine physician had betrayed them. Hing Wonja ordered the monks to move aside. Since the mechanism was broken, brute force was now the only option. Just as the monks prepared to clear the way, a violent explosion erupted near the entrance of the mansion. It was the same unmistakable sound of gunpowder as the night before. The enemies had begun their assault, and it would not take long before they reached them. One of the monks reported that the attackers had started using gunpowder. Hing Wonja responded that there was no need to panic, as the sapphire gravestone wall and multiple security systems had also been installed at that entrance, which would delay the intruders. They tried to hurry, but chaos erupted instead. Shouts rang out from within the mansion, warning that enemies were already inside. Hing Wonja's expression darkened. The situation unfolding was identical to the strategy he had planned to use, except now he and his group were the ones trapped inside, while their enemies closed in from all sides. Fury burned through him as he realized the truth. Gamrosu had betrayed him. At the same time, far away from the mansion, 7 figures moved swiftly through the cave that served as the end of the secret passage. It was Chun Yo-won's group. From behind them, the distant echoes of explosions and shouting carried through the tunnel. Hobum grinned as he listened to the noise fading behind them, satisfied that the enemies had already entered the mansion. Danhwa calmly acknowledged the outcome, having anticipated this exact turn of events when he devised the plan. Baekji let out a strained groan as his face flushed red. Gamrosu was on his back, and despite her age, her body was solid with dense muscle, making her far heavier than she looked. Gamrosu scoffed at him, remarking that he was weaker than his appearance suggested. Earlier, she had bluntly ordered Baekji to carry her on his back, questioning whether an old woman like her was expected to walk. Left with no room to argue, Baekji had ended up bearing the full weight of her without complaint. Yin Moha urged everyone to move faster, reminding them that there was no time to waste. Baekji acknowledged her command, gritting his teeth as he continued running. After some distance, the group reached what appeared appeared to be the exit of the passage, only to find it blocked. Gamrosu assessed the obstruction and stated that it was merely a rock that could be pushed aside. Yinmoha nodded and stepped forward. Channeling her power, she shoved the rock with force, sending it tumbling away. Light immediately flooded into the cave. As the rock fell completely, the outside came into view, a cliff directly opposite them. However, figures were already waiting there. Yinmoha and the others stiffened as they saw the number of enemies gathered on the other side. Danwa quickly assessed the situation and judged that there were more than 20 of them. Yinmoha decided without hesitation. She declared that she would lead the way and ordered everyone to stay close behind her. She sprinted forward and leapt across the 30-meter gap in a single bound. Drawing her sword midair, she landed among the masked men and charged. They attempted to react, but it was too late. The third formation of the true demon's sword flashed, and several of their necks were severed instantly, killing them on the spot. Yinmoha pressed forward to continue her assault, but one of the masked men raised a whistle hanging at his neck. She immediately realized his intent and fired a bullet of force chi toward him. The attack narrowly missed its target when another masked man shoved the whistle holder aside. In that instant, a powerful surge of energy descended upon Yinmoha. She reacted on instinct, lifting her sword and pouring all of her strength into her defense. The incoming attack was bullet force chi. Even at full power, the impact drove her backward, forcing her to skid across the ground until the energy finally dissipated. Yinmoha sensed it immediately. The presence behind the incoming force chi made her turn her head toward its source. More masked men began converging after the whistle sounded. Their numbers were far greater than expected. Through them, the old man from the inn stepped forward into view. The old man mocked the situation, remarking that he had not expected a place like this to have only a single exit. His gaze shifted to Gamrosu, and he derided her appearance, expressing surprise that the divine physician was nothing more than an old crook. Munku clenched her teeth the instant she saw his face. Yinmoha and Danwa felt the pressure of the situation tightening around them. It was already difficult enough to deal with the old man alone, but the man standing beside him posed another serious threat. Unlike the old man, this one did not wear a mask, and the aura he emitted was unmistakably powerful, at least at the early evolutionary realm. The old man drew his sword from its scabbard, his grin widening with excitement. He addressed Li Chung, instructing him to handle the others and bring him the divine physician. While he personally dealt with the two before him, Li Chung acknowledged the order. Declaring the start of the battle, the old man vanished. In the next instant, he reappeared before Yinmoha like a bolt of lightning. Yinmoha recoiled, rapidly retreating to create distance as she shouted for the others to protect the divine physician. Hobam, Hosangwa, and Munku immediately formed a defensive circle around Baekji, who was still carrying Gamrosu on his back. Gamrosu tugged harshly at Baekji's hair, yelling for him to move faster, making him cry out in pain. Yinmoha sent a telepathic message to Danwa, stating that she would handle the old man and ordering him to kill the other one. Danwa acknowledged and drew his blade, launching himself toward Li Chung. Before he could reach him, the old man abruptly shifted positions and intercepted Danwa's path. The old man smiled coldly and blocked Danwa's path, making it clear that neither he nor Yinmoha would be allowed to move freely. At the same time, Li Chung surged forward, charging straight toward the three protecting the divine physician. His target was Munku. Munku raised force chi in both her hands to defend herself. Li Chung's expression shifted in surprise. Instinctively, he twisted his body and swung his sword to the right. A rusted sword flew toward him. He was forced to block it, but the power carried within the decayed blade was overwhelming. Li Chung was pushed back by the violent force embedded in it and had to pour all his energy into deflecting it. The sword shattered the moment it was repelled. Li Chung roared in fury, demanding to know what that attack had been. The words sword whispering echoed as realization struck him. He turned sharply toward the direction from which the sword had been thrown. Confusion spread through him until something impossible happened. The ground began to tremble. At first, it seemed like the rock itself was shaking, but that was not the case. The masked men cried out as the truth became clear. The hundreds of swords embedded in the stone wall were trembling. All eyes turned toward the wall. One by one, the swords tore themselves free from the rock. They rose into the air, suspended unnaturally, their tips turning as one toward the masked men. Shouts of shock erupted as the sight defied all reason. Swords were moving on their own. Even the old man froze, stunned by what he was witnessing. Hundreds of swords hovered in the air, and from the depths of the cliff below, something began to rise. Munku's eyes widened in disbelief. Tears welled instantly as recognition struck her, and she screamed with all her strength. Earlier, after a long and grueling climb, using both the black sword and the white dragon blade, Yoan had finally escaped the most dangerous section of the cliff. The violent winds had subsided, and he could now sense numerous presences above. He judged that there was no longer a need to continue climbing in the same way. As he prepared to create another foothold using air sword, his attention was drawn upward. Someone had just leapt across the cliff above him. Among those figures, one presence felt unmistakably familiar. Yowon recognized it instantly. It was Munku. Others were crossing the cliff as well. Yowon realized he had to move faster. The method he had been using until now was too slow. He changed his approach. If he could control a sword freely, then instead of using it merely as a foothold, he could ride it. He activated the sword whispering technique. Placing the heavenly demon sword beneath him, he poured his energy into it until the blade responded as if it were part of his own body. The sword lifted and Yowon stepped onto it with both feet. He bound his footing to the blade with chi and commanded it upward. The sword carried him from the depths of the valley, rising steadily. From above, it appeared as though a demon god was ascending from the depths of the demonic realm. Munku cried out as tears streamed down her face. Her reaction was not the only one. Hobom and Hosangwa also broke down upon seeing Yowon alive, overwhelmed by relief and disbelief. Yinmoha stared at Yowon with widened eyes, sensing the drastic change in him and realizing that he had reached the mystic realm. Danhwa was left stunned. In a single night, Yowon had become someone entirely different. The transformation was so extreme that Danhwa questioned whether Yowon truly was a being chosen by fate itself. The old man watched in disbelief. He recognized Yowon as the one who had fallen from the cliff and should have died in the explosion. Survival alone was impossible, yet what shocked him more was Yowon's presence. The aura Yowon now emitted was completely different from before. The old man had previously judged him to be at the evolutionary realm, but there was no doubt now. Yowon had reached the mystic realm. He instinctively sensed that something extraordinary had happened below the cliff, and his thoughts turned toward the divine physician and the secrets she might possess. The situation was rapidly turning against him. The old man mocked Yowon openly, claiming that mere survival meant nothing, and challenging him to fight instead of flaunting his power. He dismissed the display of hundreds of swords as impossible, believing it to be nothing more than intimidation. Inwardly, the old man remained convinced. Even among those of the mystic realm, controlling such a number of swords was beyond reason. He believed the true limit was far lower, and that Yowon was simply bluffing, attempting to deceive someone of equal standing. Yowon's voice carried no emotion, as he made it clear that there was no deception in his actions. The old man responded with derisive laughter, dismissing everything as a trick. Yowon activated NANO without hesitation. NANO immediately initiated the funnel remote control system, locking onto all designated targets and bringing 128 swords under control. At Yowon's command, they were released. In the next instant, 128 swords moved simultaneously. The sight was overwhelming. The blades surged through the air as if they possessed life of their own, rushing straight toward the masked warriors. Shock rippled through the enemy ranks. What they were witnessing defied all common sense. Screams erupted as dozens of masked men were pierced, sliced apart, and cut down in seconds. Blood sprayed across the ground, and the battlefield was drowned in chaos and crimson. Several swords streaked toward the old man at terrifying speed. He reacted instantly, swinging his blade to deflect them. The rusted swords shattered the moment they were struck, but their sheer number forced him on the defensive. The old man ground his teeth in disbelief. This should not have been possible. No one should have been capable of this. As the situation reversed, Li Chung abandoned caution and charged toward Munku, attempting to seize the divine physician before everything collapsed. Munku raised her hand to defend, but she was a fraction too slow. Li Chung's sword closed in on her head with lethal speed. Fear flashed through Munku as she realized she would not make it in time. At that moment, swords tore through the battlefield in every direction, blood splashing across the ground. To Yowon, time seemed to slow. He surged forward, passing through falling bodies without hesitation. His saber, saturated with chi, flashed once across Li Chung's neck. Li Chung's blade halted a breath away from Munku's head. His body stiffened completely, his eyes wide and vacant as life drained from him. A thin red line formed across his neck, and a moment later his head was severed, falling heavily to the ground. The old man roared in rage and disbelief at the sight. Blood sprayed from the collapsing corpse as Yowon kicked the body aside. At that moment, Yowon's body swayed. A sharp, crushing pain surged through his head, and dizziness flooded his senses. NANO reported that 75% of Yowon's energy had been consumed, warning of cerebral overload. The funnel remote control system was forcibly shut down. The instant the system deactivated, the draining sensation stopped. The piercing headache subsided, and with the loss of control, the remaining swords lost their power and clattered uselessly to the ground. Yowon realized inwardly that he had pushed himself too far, even Even with Nano's support, controlling all of the swords had exceeded his limits. He acknowledged that he could only manage about half of them at most. His priority now was to recover his chi and eliminate the remaining enemies directly. The surviving masked men stared at him in terror. Any will to fight had vanished. To them, he no longer felt human. The old man understood immediately that this was his opening. Roaring Yo-won's direction, he launched himself forward in a furious attack. Yo-won shoved Monku backward to clear her from danger and raised his Sky Demon sword to meet the strike. The two blades collided head-on. A violent surge of energy exploded outward from the impact, blasting everyone nearby off their feet and forcing them back. Baekji hurriedly retreated further, shielding Gamrosu as he moved away from the clash. Yet as the clash ended, it was the old man's hand that trembled uncontrollably, revealing the truth of the exchange. Yo-won followed through and swung his blade with the intent to kill the old man, just as he had done to the man before. The old man reacted instantly, raising his hand and coating it with force chi to block the strike. At the same time, he roared an order at the remaining masked men, telling them to seize the divine physician. Startled back into action, they rushed toward Hosangwa, Hobom, and Monku. Before they could close the distance, Yin Moha cut through two of them in a single strike, ripping their necks apart and dropping them where they stood. The old man's thoughts turned grim. Everything had collapsed because of this one monstrous existence. The youth before him looked barely past 20, yet his presence was comparable to the 5 great masters. Even exhausted, Yo-won had overturned the entire situation. With the numbers now against him, the old man understood that the battle had shifted completely in their favor. Regret burned through him for not killing Yo-won the moment his chi had been depleted. With no other option left, he resolved to injure Yo-won as much as possible and escape. Yo-won noticed something unusual. The old man suddenly struck downward, forcing Yo-won's sword toward the ground. Their blades slammed into the earth together. Using that instant, the old man retreated and unleashed his strongest technique. Powerful energy gathered at the tip of his sword as he released the sword formation. The moment Yo-won saw it, recognition struck. The angles of the incoming slashes were abnormal, neither a direct thrust nor a conventional cut. The attack came from an irregular angle, but Yo-won had already grasped its trajectory and blocked it without difficulty. Yo-won identified the technique immediately. He recognized it as a style belonging to the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. The old man's eyes widened in alarm as he realized his martial art had been exposed. Panic surged through him. His identity being revealed meant he could no longer linger. He poured force chi into his movements, using the formation to create distance and retreat. Yo-won evaded effortlessly, employing a unique stepping technique to slip past the attack. The old man recognized it instantly. That movement was the Step of Wind God, the same skill used by the masked demonic cult member he had fought months ago in Jejiang. The realization hit him all at once, and he shouted in shock that Yo-won was the masked demonic cult member from that encounter. At the same time, Yo-won recalled the Great Guardian's words about an opponent in Zhejiang who had used the Berserk Saber god art of the 6 martial arts sect. Frustration consumed the old man. If the youth before him truly was that demonic cult member, then he could not be allowed to live, no matter the cost. For the sake of his grand designs, this threat had to be erased. Abandoning all thoughts of retreat, the old man charged back in. He unleashed everything he had, driving his internal energy to its limit as he activated the final formation of his art. He declared with certainty that Yo-won would not escape this attack. The technique he used was the Soaring Dragon formation, the 6th formation of the Berserk Saber God's skill. Yet Yo-won showed no concern. His body lifted slightly from the ground as he gripped the white dragon blade with both hands and slammed it downward into the earth. The old man gasped in horror. From the impact, a blade formation erupted, spreading outward in 8 intertwined traces like a dragon in motion. It tore straight through the old man's sword chi and surged forward. The old man hurriedly raised a defensive formation, forcing all his remaining energy into it, but it was futile. His sword cracked under the pressure. Blue blade force chi burst through the shattered weapon and cleaved into his body. A pained gasp escaped him as the force continued past him and struck the ground, blasting dust into the air. Blood poured from his mouth. His body was drenched and torn by the blade formation that had overwhelmed him. Staring ahead in disbelief, he questioned how Yo-won had learned such a technique, before coughing up another mouthful of blood and collapsing to the ground. Yo-won observed him calmly. He had deliberately restrained his strength to ensure the old man survived. survived. There were too many unanswered questions to let him die yet. As the battle finally settled, young Danhwa rushed forward and dropped to his knees before Yowon, striking his head against the ground in apology. Yowon immediately stopped him, stating that no one was to blame. The situation had been too sudden, and there was no fault to assign. He ordered Danhwa to stand. Nearby, Gamrosu realized that this young man was the very person everyone had been grieving for. Yowon suddenly turned northward and frowned. He extended his hand and made a sharp upward gesture. Nearly a mile north of the abandoned Sword Valley, two figures with blood-soaked clothing were fleeing desperately through the bushes. It was Hing Wunja, accompanied by another monk. Hing Wunja pushed himself to run faster. Even as a member of the Hydra, he knew he stood no chance against that monster. He had to escape, gather far more men, and perhaps even seek the aid of the powerful Hubei alliance. He urged his companion to hold on just a little longer, while the monks struggled to respond through labored breaths as they fled. A sharp disturbance cut through the air without warning. Hing Wunja sensed it only when the energy was already upon them. He reacted instantly, throwing himself down and forcing his body flat against the ground. The monk behind him was not fast enough. A sword pierced cleanly through the monk's back. His body stiffened, and he collapsed forward after calling out once, his life extinguished on the spot. A chill ran through Hing Wunja's spine. The realization struck him hard. All of the masked men must have been wiped out in an impossibly short span of time. The distance alone made it unthinkable. The fact that the attack had reached this far meant only one thing. A master of the mystic realm truly was a monster beyond reason. Fear drove Hing Wunja forward. He could not afford to slow down. He had to escape and return with overwhelming support. There was no time to retrieve the body. Hing Wunja quickly took the book from the dead monk's pocket, the same book Gamrosu had taken earlier. A hole had been torn through it where the sword had passed, but he took it regardless. Without the need to match another person's pace, Hing Wunja accelerated, fleeing through the forest with everything he had left. He vowed to survive no matter what, and return with allies. Not long after, another presence arrived at the scene. Yin Moha stood over the fallen monk and immediately understood what had happened. The sword embedded in the body was the one Yowon had thrown. The dense forest would normally make such precision impossible, yet the strike had landed exactly as intended. She realized that one enemy had still escaped. Two sets of footprints had led to this spot. Yin Moha chose the trail of the one who had fled alone. If her suspicion was correct, allowing that man to escape would be extremely dangerous. Elsewhere, Hobam and Baekji were gathering the corpses of the masked men into one place. The bodies were heavy, and the work was unpleasant. Baekji instructed Hobam to erase every trace left on the ground. The reason soon became clear. Yowon intended for this entire incident to appear as nothing more than a violent clash between the Wu-Tang sect and the masked group, ensuring that suspicion would fall elsewhere, while the truth remained buried. Inside the hidden mansion within the abandoned Sword Valley, the divine physician, Gamrosu, searched frantically through every corner of the building. Her expression was pale and strained, as if something invaluable had gone missing. She muttered in agitation, repeatedly asking where it had gone. She clearly remembered placing it in her inner pocket earlier, yet after finishing her preparations and escaping, the book had vanished without a trace. Yowon called out to her, breaking her frantic search. Gamrosu reacted sharply, startled by his voice. Yowon stated calmly that he knew she was busy, but asked if she could prepare a few medicines for him. Gamrosu echoed the word in confusion as Yowon confirmed his request. He picked up a sheet of paper from the table and wrote down a list of ingredients he needed. When Gamrosu read it, her eyes widened slightly and she murmured the name of one herb in surprise. She acknowledged that while she did not have much of it, she kept a small amount in stock for use as a painkiller. At her answer, Yowon smiled faintly. Elsewhere in the mansion, Munku and Ho Sangwa had restrained two masked men and the old man, confining them in separate rooms with their bodies tightly bound. Ho Sangwa pulled at the old man's face, stretching the artificial skin until the mask peeled away and revealed the face beneath. Both of them froze in confusion. Based on his voice and mannerisms, they had assumed the enemy would be far older, yet the man beneath the mask was not nearly as aged as expected. At that moment, the man suddenly twitched. Munku flinched and instantly shifted into a fighting stance. Before anything else could happen, the man lost consciousness again. Munku confirmed what she had seen, questioning whether he had just moved. Ho Sangwa agreed, noting that she had expected it to take much longer for him to awaken. Munku decided to keep watch on him for now and stated that she would go bring the demon lord. Ho Sangwa acknowledged and remained behind, guarding the restrained man. The man groaned faintly as he regained consciousness. His eyes opened with effort, and the first thing he saw was the rope binding him tightly to the chair. The realization came immediately. He had been captured. He had been certain he was killed when he was struck down. Lowering his gaze, he saw his wounds carefully wrapped in linen. They had deliberately kept him alive. The reason was obvious. They wanted information. He dismissed the thought with cold certainty. They would get nothing from him. With escape impossible, he chose another option. He attempted to force his internal energy into a berserk state, intending to destroy himself from within. The moment he tried, a searing pain stopped him cold. Needles had been driven into every critical blood point, completely sealing his ability to circulate internal energy. They had restrained him perfectly. As his expression hardened, the door opened. Yoan entered the room calmly, pulled a chair forward, and sat directly in front of him. The cloth gag was removed from the man's mouth. He sucked in ragged breaths and lifted his head, glaring with burning resentment. Even so, confusion flickered beneath his rage. He could not understand how a warrior of the demonic cult could possibly know that blade technique. Yoan reacted with visible disdain. He corrected the man inwardly and outwardly in his actions. He was not a mere warrior of the cult. The man attempted to mock him, convinced he had already identified Yowun as the masked opponent from Zhejiang, but the words never fully formed. Yowun silenced him instantly, gripping his mouth and shaking his head with clear finality. He made the truth known without hesitation. He was not a subordinate or a nameless fighter. He was the patriarch of the demonic cult. The weight of that revelation crushed the man's composure. Before the man could recover, Yowun placed his hand below his abdomen. The intent was unmistakable. Yowun asserted absolute dominance. The man had no right to question him. Power surged, and Yowun's energy invaded the man's internal energy mercilessly, tearing through his inner channels. The pain was beyond endurance. The man screamed uncontrollably, begging for death, pleading to be killed instead. Yoan ignored every cry and continued until the destruction was complete. The agony forced the man into unconsciousness. A sharp slap brought him back. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his face ghostly pale. The pain beneath his stomach remained, but something far worse had settled in. His internal energy was gone, completely erased. Before he could process the horror of that loss, Yoan clapped his hand sharply in front of his eyes. The sudden action left the man stunned, his thoughts scrambling. He recognized the intent immediately and felt a surge of disbelief. Yoan confirmed it without hesitation. He was about to be hypnotized. The man recalled rumors he had once heard, that an illusion master had gone to the demonic cult, only to be eliminated after becoming a liability. He had assumed such a threat would never be allowed to survive. Even now, he scoffed inwardly. Despite Yoan's monstrous techniques, he convinced himself that this attempt was meaningless. He believed the demonic cult's lord was foolish, and that the main sect would never be so unprepared as to fall to something as crude as hypnosis. Before he could continue indulging that confidence, Yoan silenced him by force. His mouth was seized, cutting off any further resistance. Yoan then picked up a medicine pot from the ground and made his intent clear through action alone. Yoan demonstrated that he had already anticipated such resistance. Ignoring the man's struggle, he poured the medicinal liquid directly into his mouth. The man choked violently, coughing as the liquid burned its way down his throat. When the immediate pain faded, he attempted to cling to arrogance once more, convinced that this too would be useless. That confidence shattered within moments. His body began to loosen unnaturally. The tension drained from his muscles, and an inexplicable sense of comfort spread through him. His thoughts slowed, his awareness dulled, and the world itself seemed to blur and melt away. Alarm flared as he realized something was deeply wrong. Yoan made it clear that he had never intended to use the same methods as his enemies. What the man had been forced to ingest was not an ordinary drug, but a substance refined with knowledge far beyond the era, what NANO classified as a truth serum. Panic surged as the man felt his self-control slipping. His body betrayed him, urging compliance. The danger was undeniable. Yoan focused his energy and began clapping in a precise rhythm. With each controlled motion, the man's awareness faded further. Soon his eyes dulled completely, and his mind slipped into a fully hypnotized state. Yoan confirmed the effect and established control, ensuring that the man would answer every question without resistance. Under that absolute influence, the man responded obediently when asked to identify himself. He revealed that his name was Li Bake, and that he was one of the 6 sect leaders of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. Yoan asked why Li Bake had tried to take the divine physician away. Under hypnosis, Li Bake revealed that she possessed an item left behind by the one he called the Great One. Yoan noted the wording. Even in this state, Lee Baek referred to that existence with reverence, suggesting a figure of overwhelming authority and power. Through the interrogation, Yoan extracted a great deal of information from Lee Baek, the master of blade sword. The item the divine physician possessed was an anatomy text that described how to create the supreme martial physique. That physique was a body capable of fully mastering the berserk saber divine martial arts. At that moment, Yoan realized that the technique he had been practicing and refining over the past few months was precisely the berserk saber divine martial arts. Lee Baek explained that the berserk saber divine martial arts could not be mastered through conventional training. To achieve it, one had to surpass the natural limits of the human body itself. Yoan questioned why such a thing was necessary and how they had known that the divine physician possessed that text. Lee Baek answered that they had learned it through a spy embedded within a secret organization of the Orthodox Miram Alliance known as the Blue Heaven Society. Through that spy, they discovered that the Orthodox faction had been planning to use the divine physician to investigate a martial artist who had surpassed his own physical limits. That investigation ultimately led them to the concept of the supreme martial physique. Yoan snapped his fingers again, acknowledging the explanation. That was the reason the berserk saber of the six martial arts sect had been targeting the divine physician. He then shifted the interrogation toward the sect itself. Elsewhere, a shrill grating scream echoed through a dark stone chamber, far more irritating than the chirping of insects. A man entered the room carrying a candle. The dim light failed to reveal his face as he moved slowly toward the source of the noise. Along the stone wall were shelves lined with wooden boxes. Among them was a red box engraved with the word sword. The screaming came from inside it. The man opened the box. Inside was a centipede roughly the length of a fist, consisting only of antennae and a mouth. It writhed and screamed as it shook violently. The man picked it up without hesitation and crushed it in his hand. The centipede screamed once more before exploding under the pressure. The man spoke coldly, stating that Lee Baek had been sent to retrieve an object, not to leak information. He then smiled, confident that whoever was interrogating Lee Baek was a fool if they believed they could truly extract anything meaningful from him. At the same moment, Yoan snapped his fingers again and asked whether the Great One Lee Baek had mentioned was the Berserk Saber God. For the first time since the interrogation began, Lee Baek's body reacted. His form trembled violently, his eyes shaking as resistance surfaced. Lee Baek struggled from within. Yoan snapped his fingers again, forcing the command through. Lee Baek barely managed to answer, his voice strained. When Yoan questioned whether their organization was divided into 6 sects as its name implied, the resistance intensified sharply. Sweat drenched Lee Baek's body, his face flushing deep red as his breathing turned erratic. Then something changed. The numbness in Lee Baek's eyes vanished. His gaze cleared unnaturally as veins bulged across his forehead. His skull began to swell, and pain twisted his expression. Yet he still smiled at Yoan. He revealed that the moment he spoke something forbidden, a signal would be sent. Yoan immediately placed his palm on Lee Baek's head. Light flared, and augmented reality activated across Yoan's vision. NANO reported the result of an internal scan. An insect embedded in Lee Baek's brain was expanding. Yoan frowned. The interrogation was being cut short. Lee Baek laughed through the pain, convinced Yoan had failed. That confidence lasted only a moment. Yoan released a concentrated surge of electricity directly into Lee Baek's head. His entire body convulsed violently as electricity tore through him. Blood spilled from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth as his scream dissolved into incoherent agony. Yoan stabilized his hand and instructed NANO to prevent brain damage. NANO acknowledged and adjusted the flow. Yoan's energy penetrated deeper, locking onto the source. The insect was halted mid-expansion by the electric shock. NANO confirmed its location. Yoan ordered it to be extracted. NANO synchronized with Yoan's energy, carefully pulling the parasite free to avoid destroying the brain. Electricity wrapped around the insect as it was drawn outward. Lee Baek's right eye began to bulge violently. With a precise motion, Yoan pulled. Lee Baek's right eye was torn free, followed by a centipede-like creature nearly 2 fingers long. His scream tore through the room as Yoan redirected the energy upward, launching the creature through the ceiling. Once outside, the electricity ceased, and the insect instantly expanded before detonating mid-air. Lee Baek collapsed, his body ravaged by pain and shock. Blood streamed freely, and his remaining eye stared in terror. NANO reported that brain damage had been minimized as much as possible, but Lee Baek did not have long to live. Yoan realized there was no more time to waste. He decided to end it quickly, acknowledging internally that it would cause pain but was unavoidable. With a snap of his fingers beside Lee Baek's ear, the man's resistance vanished once more, his mind sinking back into numb submission. Earlier, Hobom and Baek Baekji had returned to the mansion after disposing of the bodies outside. Gamrosu rushed toward them, her expression strained with urgency. Young Danhwa asked whether she still had not found what she was searching for. Gamrosu anxiously explained that she was looking for a book made of strange, unfamiliar paper, a relic passed down through her family. None of them had seen it. Her anxiety deepened, panic creeping into her voice as she worried over the loss of something so precious. Suddenly, noise echoed from the entrance. Danhwa, Baekji, and Hobam instantly took defensive stances, sending a silent signal for Gamrosu to stay still. The tension broke when a figure emerged from the cave entrance. It was Yin Moha. Relief flashed across their faces, but it was immediately replaced by shock. Something was bound to Yin Moha's back with torn cloth. It was a mutilated body, stripped of its limbs. It was Hing Wonja. Danhwa was stunned by the sight, unable to believe that Yin Moha had defeated one of the Hydra. Gamrosu, however, recoiled internally in horror, shaken by the brutality. She realized with certainty that these people were nothing like the Orthodox sects. Danhwa began to praise Yin Moha, but his words were cut off mid-sentence by a sudden explosion. The sound came from the location where Yowon had been interrogating the captured enemy. Alarm spread instantly. Everyone rushed toward the source of the blast. Munko, fearing the worst, sprinted ahead and burst into the room. Inside, Yowon was gripping Lee Baek's head, listening intently as the man forced out his final words. With barely any strength left, Lee Baek muttered fragmented information, mentioning Zhejiang, Huangshan, and a base in Hangzhou. Then his head fell forward. Lee Baek was dead. Young Danhwa immediately rushed to Yowon, his expression tense with concern. He urgently asked whether Yowon was unharmed. Yowon calmly replied that he had uncovered the enemy's location. Danhwa froze for a moment before asking if it was the base of the Berserk Saber of Six Martial Arts sect. Yowon confirmed it and stated clearly that their location was Huangshan Mountain in Hangzhou, Zhejiang. In another room, Hing Wunja was bound to a chair, his arms and legs already severed. Yin Moha checked his condition and asked Gamrosu whether he would survive if they kept pressure on his wounds. Gamrosu answered bluntly that survival was impossible and that at best he might endure for about an hour. Yowon entered the room and asked how things were progressing. Gamrosu told him that Hing Wunja did not have much time left. Yowon responded without hesitation that it was enough, as he only needed sufficient time to extract information. At that moment, Gamrosu stepped forward and knelt before Yowon. She pleaded with him, asking for a chance to question Hing Wunja herself if Yowon intended to use that medicine on him. She then revealed the truth she had been hiding. Gamrosu explained that she had been approached by the Blue Heaven Society of the Orthodox sect and was asked to research methods to push the human body beyond its natural limits. They claimed their goal was to create powerful martial artists to establish a just world. She admitted that she had never wanted to involve herself in martial affairs. However, a year ago, her only granddaughter had been kidnapped by an unorthodox sect. Driven by desperation and revenge, she accepted the Blue Heaven Society's request. They promised that in order to retrieve her granddaughter, they needed to win an upcoming war and that their current forces were insufficient. As time passed, Gamrosu grew increasingly suspicious. The Blue Heaven Society was so powerful that only a few of the 9 sects were even affiliated with it, yet they were unable to determine whether her granddaughter was alive or dead. The contradiction disturbed her deeply. Overcome with fury, Gamrosu pointed at Hing Wunja and declared with certainty that he knew something. Gamrosu bowed deeply before Yowon, her body trembling as desperation poured out of her. She begged him to help her, swearing that if he did, she would do anything within her power in return, regardless of whether he belonged to the unorthodox sects or the demonic cult. Her voice cracked as she pleaded with him not to abandon her. Yowon assessed the situation calmly. If she became indebted to them, there would be no need to persuade her later. That alone made this worthwhile. He agreed and told her that he would allow her to question Hing Wunja first. Relief flooded Gamrosu's face as she thanked him repeatedly, calling him Lord with genuine gratitude. Yowon then stated that before the questioning could begin, he needed to completely destroy Hing Wunja's chi center to ensure the medicine would function properly, and asked her to wait for a moment. Watching him, Gamrosu realized how frighteningly thorough and cold he was, and resolved to be careful around him. After Yowon destroyed Hing Wunja's internal energy and forced the medicine into his body, he placed him under hypnosis. With a snap of his fingers, Hing Wunja's lips parted. Gamrosu immediately asked about her granddaughter, demanding to know whether he truly knew where Gammian was being held. Under hypnosis, Hing Wunja revealed that her granddaughter was imprisoned in one of the 18 waterways controlled by the Dragon Tiger Claw. Gamrosu flinched as if struck by lightning. Rage exploded within her as she demanded to know why he had always claimed ignorance when she questioned him before, despite knowing the truth all along. Hing Wunja answered coldly that he had been ordered not to tell her until her research was completed, and that they had planned to retrieve her granddaughter only after she finished her work. Hobum shouted in fury, condemning the so-called orthodox sect for actions no different from those of unorthodox groups, calling Hingwunja a vile snake. Hosangwa sharply elbowed Hobum in the stomach, silencing him, but the damage was already done. Gamrosu completely lost control. She screamed and lunged forward, wrapping her hands around Hingwunja's neck and squeezing with murderous intent. She cursed him as a false monk and demanded his death, driven mad by the thought of her granddaughter. Hingwunja choked helplessly, his face rapidly turning purple as his eyes began to roll back. Yoan recognized that Hingwunja would die if this continued and stepped forward, ordering Gamrosu to stop. She could no longer hear him, her grip only tightened. Seeing that words were useless, Yoan released a powerful surge of energy that violently tore Gamrosu away from Hingwunja and sent her flying backward. Young Danwa reacted instantly and caught her midair, but she continued to thrash wildly, screaming for Hingwunja's death and crying out her granddaughter's name. Danwa restrained her firmly, urging her to calm down as she struggled in despair. Hosangwa immediately stepped forward and escorted the divine physician out of the room, putting distance between her and the dying man. Once they were alone, Youn turned his attention back to Hingwunja, whose breathing had already grown shallow and uneven. Blood and saliva stained the corner of his lips as his body trembled on the brink of collapse. Yoan demanded that he regain consciousness and reveal the true objective of the Blue Heaven Society. With what little strength remained, Hingwunja forced out broken words, claiming that the Blue Heaven Society sought nothing more than to lead the world along a righteous and just path. Even as he spoke, his condition worsened visibly, his pulse weakening by the second. NANO immediately warned Yoan that Hingwunja's heart activity had become unstable due to shock and internal bleeding, estimating a near certain chance of death. Yoan ordered NANO to stimulate both the heart and brain with electrical pulses, attempting to force a response. There was no reaction. NANO confirmed that the target had died. Yoan felt irritation rise within him. He had failed to extract any meaningful information about the Blue Heaven Society before Hingwunja's death. If he had known things would end this quickly, he would have prioritized those questions first. Now, there was nothing left to be done. He could only hope that the divine physician herself possessed knowledge about the Blue Heaven Society. As he reflected on what had happened, Yoan felt an unfamiliar discomfort. Watching a physician driven to strangle a martial artist with her own hands left him unsettled. Titles, sex, and reputation suddenly felt meaningless. Whether orthodox, unorthodox, or demonic, people were ultimately the same when pushed to their limits. Even the so-called righteous main factions were no exception. At that moment, Yin Moha approached him. In her hands were several fragments of paper, most of them badly burned. She explained that she had found Hingwunja attempting to destroy them when she reached him. Yoan examined the fragments closely as young Danwa stepped closer and remarked that they resembled the book the divine physician had been desperately searching for. The material immediately stood out. Despite being burned, the paper was unusually thick and smooth, unlike anything commonly used. As Yoan held it, NANO attempted an analysis but reported that the program was locked and unable to determine the material or the era in which it had been created. Yoan grew more alert. It had been a long time since NANO had encountered information it could not analyze. Focusing on the strange symbols etched into the remaining fragments, Yoan noted that they resembled Hanja, yet they were unfamiliar even to him. When Yoan asked how such characters were created, NANO responded that the details were sealed behind a program lock. Yoan then ordered NANO to translate the remaining legible portion. The translation revealed a fragment written in the tone of a personal record. It spoke of regret, of a grave mistake made in pursuing someone who was identified as an origin of the demonic cult. The writer admitted that greed had led to failure, and that they should have adhered to their original plan involving the demonic cult instead. The rest of the passage had been burned beyond recovery. Yoan fell into deep thought. What he had been told was that the divine physician possessed a text describing how to create the supreme martial physique, yet what he saw here resembled a journal rather than a medical manuscript. The reference to the origin of the demonic cult could only point to the founding heavenly demon. If the writer had once attempted to kill the founding heavenly demon and failed, then the traces left at the bottom of the cliff, the sword slashes carved into the stone, began to make sense. It raised an unsettling possibility. The individual who created the theory of the supreme martial physique, the one who left behind these writings, might have been the very founder of the Berserk Saber of Six Martial Arts sect. If the divine physician had discovered this text by coincidence, it explained why so many forces had been drawn to this place. Had the back portion not been burned, Yoan might have uncovered the full truth. With no further use for the fragments, Yoan returned the burned pages to Yin Moha and instructed her to give them back to the divine physician. He ordered preparations to be made for departure, stating that he would interrogate the remaining captives before leaving. The questioning took another hour. Unlike Li Bake, the two masked men possessed no meaningful intelligence. They were merely tools, ignorant of the larger schemes. As Yoan's group prepared to leave the hidden mansion, the divine physician stepped forward and bowed deeply. She expressed remorse for the trouble she had caused through her emotional outburst. Yoan dismissed it coldly, telling her not to concern herself with it. At that moment, the divine physician dropped to her knees. Her composure shattered as she begged for one final favor. She revealed that her granddaughter had been held captive for over a year by those operating along the Yellow River. As a grandmother, she could not abandon her blood no matter the cost. She pleaded for Yoan's help in rescuing the child. Yoan looked down at her without hesitation. He told her that it was regrettable, but he could not help her. Young Danhwa assessed the situation calmly and concluded that they had already spent too much time in the abandoned Sword Valley. Entering the territory of the 18 waterways would inevitably expose them to danger. Yin Moha echoed his judgment, stating that while they sympathized with Gamrosu's suffering, they could not recklessly endanger themselves. With that, the order to depart was given. At that moment, Gamrosu's resolve collapsed. Overcome by desperation, she struck her forehead against the ground and shouted in panic. She swore that if he saved her granddaughter, she would bind herself to him for the rest of her life. The vow made Yoan pause. For the divine physician to offer her lifelong loyalty was no small matter. From the perspective of the demonic cult, it was an extremely advantageous proposal. Before Gamrosu could lower her head again, her body was lifted upright by an overwhelming force of chi. Yoan's voice descended coldly upon her, warning her not to forget the words she had just spoken. Relief and gratitude overwhelmed her. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out in thanks, realizing that her final gamble had succeeded. Young Danhwa glanced at Hobam and remarked that they had ended up heading toward one of the 18 waterways after all. Hobam was momentarily confused, but then understanding dawned on him. He recalled his earlier warning from long ago, when he had mentioned river bandits of the Yellow River, martial artists who preyed upon travelers. At the time, Danhwa had dismissed it, explaining that such bandits only targeted merchant vessels, not small crossing boats. Now, that forgotten warning had returned to mock them. After her emotions settled, Gamrosu cautiously asked for Yoan's name. When he introduced himself as Chun Yoan, the name struck her with unexpected force. The surname Chun was rare within the Jianghu, and the name itself resonated with something she had overheard in the past. A chill ran through her spine as realization struck. The new lord of the demonic cult. Everyone in the martial world knew that the demonic cult had recently changed its ruler, and the forces of justice had been especially vigilant because of it. Only now did Gamrosu fully understand what she had done. She had just sworn eternal service to the lord of the demonic cult himself. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.